Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Past timeline somewhere between 1926 to year 1945 AD. Mr. Scamander, do you know anything about the wizarding community in America? We don't like things loose. Sal and his people were standing in the shadow of one of the best viewing points in Nuremberg, on the wall of the imperial castle, looking down at the city while staying in the shadow of the castle itself. Nuremberg, Newt said, and looked at the city in awe, using the German version of its name, a version he was a lot more used to than the English one, considering that he had lived as a German wizard for quite some time before he was found out a spy. He stepped closer to the edge of the wall and looked down on the maze of tiny streets. The 6 narrow houses that stretched themselves over half of their view of the city were old and half-timbered buildings in different kind of colors. Behind them they could see the historic center of the town. We should have guessed that Grindelwald would have found a way to have his prison and his headquarters here, Theseus Scamander said. He was obsessed with this city, even the first time he tried to gain power over Europe. Newt inclined his head. He was, he agreed, and looked down on the streets by leaning himself over the wall. But until now there was no evidence that he had managed to find a place anywhere near here. Sal sighed and looked around as well. Nuremberg. He had been here before. He knew the maze of the tiny streets of the old town like the back of his own hand. He had lived here for a while, after all. Even if it had been centuries since then and the city had changed a bit, a lot of things had still stayed the same. There was still St. Lawrence, the church with its 2 towers nearly hidden behind the half-timbered house on the outer right side of the 6 houses. A church which had been still worked on the last time he had seen it. There were other houses just as old, or at least on the same places like the last ones Sal had known. And yet, Nuremberg had changed as well. It had grown, it had been modernized, and it had turned into the home of the most dangerous wizard in the whole of Europe. How far away are we from his new headquarters? Sirius Black asked, while following with his gaze Newt's own, which had settled on the people in the streets. About an hour and a half, Newt answered, and followed with his gaze a young boy running down the street. Considering that there was a war all around them, this day was surprisingly calm. From here, where to? Pollux asked and leaned onto the wall to follow Newt's gaze with his eyes as well. To the east, Newt answered and pointed towards his left side, his body facing the city. A bit more to the north as well, but not that much. Pollux nodded thoughtfully. And the wards? He asked. Newt waved it off. Impressive, but not that far from the building as well, he said. The Muggles know the place as a small moated castle called Oberberg. They have no idea that in the middle of the castle courtyard there's another, hidden inner bailey, the Bailey of Normengard. Normengard, Sal repeated and closed his eyes. Grindelwald's headquarter and prison. Yes, Newt agreed before sighing. I guess you want me to lead you through Nuremberg's streets to Oberberg now? If you please, Alaric agreed, his eyes alight with unholy light. I think it should be late enough that we will reach it when the night descends right now. Newt pouted, but in the end nodded. All right, he agreed. Follow me. And with that he turned away from the wall and instead left the imperial castle through its winding entrance back to the streets. They would go by foot, because, unlike magical transportation, Grindelwald hadn't accounted someone nearing his headquarters by foot who wasn't an ignorant muggle. But then Grindelwald had always underestimated Sal or his men even in the past. Monty. The return to war started with an innocent letter, sent by an old friend from New York. It was plain and relatively simple in writing, but the context made more than up for the missing flowery speech the rest of the wizarding world favored. It didn't even have a halfway respectful beginning. Sal was the word it started with, and as plain as that it continued. Sal. I've been in New York this year, and I've some distressing news for you. I stumbled upon Grindelwald here, hiding in the American Ministry of Magic itself. With my help he was taken to prison, but he escaped again. Keep an eye open if you please. He might return to Europe. Newt. P.S. I will miss our lovers' spats. A simple letter, yet Such a grievous content. It looked like it was time to rise the knights again. What are you looking at, lad? Sal looked up from the letter clutched in his hands and into a pair of big blue eyes, hidden behind thick glasses. A letter from a friend, Sal answered. The man with a sigh, and his gaze automatically returned to the words written on the parchment. There's trouble, the man frowned. What kind of trouble? He asked Sal. Sal just sighed deeply again. The wrong kind of trouble, he answered. The absolutely wrong kind. For a moment he hesitated, his gaze lingering on the letter in front of him. Then he looked up at the huge eyes of the man, made huge by the glasses, and went into more detail than before. Grindelwald might come back, he said. The people to contact, safe houses to organize, countries to warn. He shook his head. It will be bloody difficult to reach all those who need to know in time, and it will be even more difficult to find people who will believe me that he's coming back, and that they'll have to fight to survive, he told the other man without sugarcoating it at all. Sadly, a lot of those people will be more inclined to stick their heads in the sand instead of interested in preparing for the worst possibility. The other man frowned. So what? He asked. You need a transport? Sal snorted. It's not that I'm unable to apparate myself, he pointed out. It's more like that I'll be tired out before even reaching half of the people I need to contact, and that contacting them by owl post might take too long. The letter is more than a few weeks old. For all I know, Grindelwald is already back in Europe, strengthening his army. That's indeed a problem, the other man said, and then held out a hand to Sal. I might be not really useful myself, considering that I'm not really the strong of a wizard, but at least transport, that can I do. Sal stared at the man next to him on the bar stool in befuddlement. You have nothing to do with the war, he said, confused. Nah, the other man said. Well, I lived in Switzerland at the time of the last. Unlike my other fellows here, I remember the resistance. At that, Sal looked at the other man sharply. The man shrugged. Heinrich Überstadt was a dunderhead, he said. I'm all for helping you guys out this time around. With that, he shook his hand, clearly wishing Sal to take it. Sal just hesitated a second, then he clasped it. The man grinned, revealing crooked and yellow teeth. I'm Ernest Prang, the man told him. Though most people just call me Crazy Ernie. Sal raised an eyebrow at that. Crazy? He repeated in disbelief, and the other man's grin broadened. Crazy, he replied, not elaborating further. Sal shook his head, but shook the other man's hand nevertheless. Nice to meet you, Ernie, he said. I'm Salvasahan Malfoy, but most people call me Sal. Oh, the man exclaimed. Sal Sanctuary himself. A pleasure to meet you, Herr Sanctuary. Sal rolled his eyes at the man. It seems as if he always managed to pick up the weird ones. Unfortunately, that thought would only be further enforced when Sal had his first ride with Ernie Pang's car service. Ernie had one of the most modern cars in all of Britain right now, and of course he had decided to modify it to his needs. Sadly, what he saw as his needs, others saw as an accident waiting to happen, at least after they were subjected to Ernie's driving for the first time. Of course, considering that the car only had a textile roof and no windows, well, it might be easier to understand if Sal would be able to find another comparison. But the one he had thought of even after 2,000 years between his last ride before Crazy Ernie, even after 2,000 years there was just one comparison that fit that ride. Night bus, Sal thought while leaving the car on unsteady feet. That ride felt like the one I had with the night bus back then. In the following years, Sal's men would feel at the same time thankful as apprehensive every time they needed the services of Crazy Ernie while too wounded or too tired to leave the battlefield without his help. As for Grindelwald, it would take another 4 years until he finally started to surface again. By then, Sal would have contacted everybody and ensured that safe houses and other necessities were taken care of. And while some people claimed that he was delusional after not hearing from Grindelwald for months that turned into years, the Blacks under their new head, Sirius Black, as well as the Scarmaders, the Ollivanders, the Potters, Ulrich Moody and some others, never doubted him, just like Ernie Pang. Ronte. The first traces of Grindelwald after his long absence were some rumors. It wasn't enough that most politicians wanted to listen to Sal, but it was enough for his old group to gather with concern etched into their faces. They met inside one of the safe houses Sal had organized. It was plain and in the middle of the countryside of southern France. The room they met in was made of wood, wooden floors, wooden ceiling, wooden walls, and only lit by the light of a few candles. It had no windows, not that it would have mattered much considering that it was night outside and therefore dark there as well. When Sal entered the room, it was crowded by conjured chairs and grave faces. Sal looked around the room, his eyes going from one face to the next. There've been rumors about recruitments of known criminals into something bigger. He started his speech darkly. I haven't been able to find out more, but with Grindelwald on the run again, there's a high possibility that he's stirring up Europe again. Theseus Scamander finished sighing. He was a bit older than before, his handsome face showing lines where there hadn't been any the last time they saw each other. He was sitting in the back of the room, leaning heavily against a redhead in a blue coat and a green stick-like creature sitting on his other shoulder, his brother, one Newton Artemis Fido Scamander. Sal inclined his head at Theseus in agreement. So, Jérôme Delacour, the Lord Delacour said. He was sitting nearly on the opposite wall of the room than Theseus, and looked like he was in the middle of a lavish banquet instead of a meeting of rascals. He was wearing the finest linen and sitting stiffly while listening avidly. What do we do? We'll prepare, Sal said, sighing, slouching a bit at that answer. They hadn't even started yet, and he already felt tired, but then they had been waiting and looking out for signs for the last 4 years. A constant watch was as tiring or even more tiring than open warfare could ever be. Prepare. How? Sirius Black asked, and leaned forward, his brother Arcturus next to him. Sal sighed and then shrugged. Recruitment, he said, and pinched his nose. Building a political power base in Britain, listening to rumors and act the moment we find something more concrete than we have now. The others looked at each other, then some of them nodded slowly. Charles nudged Sirius a bit amused. I think you might be able to help with the whole political side. Don't you, my lord? He asked, amused, and Sirius rolled his eyes. Just because I'm now the Lord Black, I don't think that it will help a lot, Sirius answered with a sigh. My father was for the resistance as well, and yet with everybody listening to Dumbledore, he had no chance to get the help we hoped for us. Charles snarled angrily. Yes, he said unhappily. That man is the most troublesome man I've ever met, especially considering how he's been treating my father and everybody else who goes against him. Ulrich raised an eyebrow at Charles. Your father? He teased. I thought that Henry Potter was your uncle, Charles. Charles rolled his eyes amused. As if anybody here doesn't know that my actual name is Fleamont Charles Potter, he said and waved his words off. I'm not about to lie to my comrades in war when I don't have to. Ollivander snickered. Well, he said jokingly, I could use an obliviate if you don't want anybody of us to know about that anymore. Charles rolled his eyes and Alaric cuffed the other man over the head. One would have thought that you had grown up in the last decade. Sadly enough, this doesn't seem to be the case at all. He declared, not annoyed at all. Well, Ollivander drawled, as amused as Alaric. Unlike you, I didn't make the mistake and marry, so of course I managed to stay as insane as I have been before. Not that much of an achievement considering you're an Ollivander and your father and grandfather already proved that you're all insane, Sirius countered amused. Ollivander just smirked. It's not the Ollivanders who are known for their inherited insanity, he countered, grinning. Sirius rolled his eyes. It's not my fault that we blacks are always interpreted wrongly by everybody else, he countered, and his brother nodded. We just grin innocently at somebody, and suddenly we're considered insane by everybody who sees us, Arcturus Black added sadly. Cygnus, the last of the brothers, just nodded as sadly as his other brother. People simply don't appreciate our smiles anymore. With that, his face twisted into a smile that could only be called unhinged. Of course, his brothers followed up with the same smile just a second later. The others around the room snorted. Newton Theseus Scamander smirked before mimicking the insane smile as well. Seems we must be related to the blacks, Theseus pointed out. Newt nodded. Maybe the blacks should introduce some of their daughters. We definitely need a way to combine the insanity of our two lines, and Thays is the only one who still can do that, he said, grinning. Charles groaned. No, he exclaimed, I object. Anything but a marriage between the blacks and the Scamanders. The Scamander brothers and the Black brothers exchanged an amused smirk. Then I guess we will have to look forward to a marriage between House Potter and House Black in the future, Newt said, amused. Or how else should I understand that sentence? Charles threw the spymaster a disgusted glance. As if I'd ever marry a black, he said with a shudder. I've enough trouble with the one black I call my best friend right now. At least, this would be Charles's opinion until young Doria Black would walk into his life in 1937. Sadly, at least sadly for the Potter heir, he would fall to her charm right after the first spell he'd see her ever cast. Sal raised his eyebrow when Sirius Black stepped into the tent he was currently using as a base. He knew that the other man had been home for the last 2 months, so he was a bit surprised that the man was back here when he was needed in Britain after taking over the lordship of his father Phineas Nicholas Black, and therefore also taking over his seat in the Wizengamot. Sirius, Sal greeted the man nevertheless. What are you doing here? The man grinned a bit, madly. I'm here to present you some help we didn't have before, he answered, grinning a grin that was full of the rumored black insanity. Sal raised an eyebrow at the insane man. Whom? He asked. As an answer, Sirius stepped aside and gestured for the people behind him to enter. This is my nephew Pollux, his brother Marius and his sister Cassiopeia, their cousins Calidora and Cedrella, as well as my own children. My sons Arcturus Sirius, his brother Regulus and their sister Lycoris, he said proudly while gesturing at each of the entering young adults. They decided to join our little alliance. Sal raised an eyebrow. Are you planning to bring the whole Black family into the war? He asked, amused. Sirius shrugged. If I hadn't brought them, they would have rebelled, he countered. I'm not that eager to be subjected to Marius's ingenious mind, so I decided to take the line of the least resistance and just brought them with me. One of the boys, Marius, as Sal would learn soon, grinned. Uncle knows us too well, it seems, he said, amused. You mean he knows you too well, Marius? His brother Pollux objected. I wouldn't dare to threaten the head of our house with pranks if he doesn't do what I want. The other man crossed his arms and pouted. It's not as if I'd threaten our head of house if it wasn't important, Marius countered. His cousin Arcturus Sirius just ruffled his hair at that exclamation. Of course you wouldn't, he said fondly. And believe me, we're all thankful for it. Marius rolled his eyes. Oh, stop it, Archie, he cried and slapped away his cousin's hand. You're just unhappy that I can do stuff you can't. It's not my fault that you don't understand technic like most of the wizarding world. Well, we've got you to explain it to us. Arcturus Sirius shrugged. At least you can put the whole stuff into words. I actually understand, and not those made-up words that muggles use. Marius raised an eyebrow at his cousin. Since I'm a squib, I'm not better than a muggle, he pointed out to his cousin, oddly unbothered by his lack of magic. You know how magic works? And you can brew potions? Arcturus Sirius countered. You're much more like us, useless wizards, than those useful muggles. Marius rolled his eyes at his cousin. In other words, I'm as stupid and as insane as you, he said, half amused, half exasperated. What a nice assortment of my character. This time it was his brother who slapped his back. No, little brother, Pollux said earnestly. We all know that you're not at all as stupid and as insane as we. Marius raised an eyebrow. I'm not, he asked, clearly used to the bickering with his siblings and cousins. Pollux smirked. Of course not, he exclaimed, before adding with an even deeper smirk. You're worse. Hey, Marius objected, but before he could add something else, Lord Sirius Black spoke up again. Stop bickering, boys, he interfered. I don't need a prank war in the tent of the leader of the resistance. Sal just looked at them in amusement. I'd prefer some less war in my tent as well, he said, but if you want to invent something to drive Grindelwald crazy, be my guest. Maybe Sal shouldn't have said that. because the Black family would truly make some use of that promise not too far into Sal's future. Barely a month after the joining of the Blacks, the discussion of the war in the Resistance would be taken up a new notch. Grindelwald had started his own attack up again, but this time, the Resistance didn't plan to sit back and wait until Grindelwald was as strong as he had been before he had been taken down by the Resistance. This time, the Resistance had the chance to take action way before Grindelwald was up to his play, and the Resistance would do everything to use that to its benefits. We should think about our strategy. We might be able to step up our attacks this time around, Theseus said, frowning thoughtfully. Theseus, Scamander, and the rest of the Resistance had gathered in Sal's tent for a meeting. It was something that didn't happen often, but with Grindelwald starting to step up his attacks, Sal appreciated the opinion of everybody working with him, even if some of the ideas he might get would be something he would have to get used to over time. Of course, especially the Scamander brothers had shown their unusual way of thinking in the past, but that didn't mean that Theseus Scamander and his brother were the only insane ones in Sal's Resistance. We should be able to step up our attacks this time around, Theseus added, determined. We just need to rethink our strategy and change it in a way Grindelwald would have never thought of or predicted. His brother Newt nodded at that and leaned forward eagerly, nearly dislodging his brother by doing so. We got some interesting help this time around, after all, he said, grinning at some newcomers, most of them of Black descent. The answer was a matching grin from them as well, tinged with something that later might evolve in the all-too-well-known Black insanity. Then one of the new Blacks spoke up. If we're stepping up the attacks on Grindelwald's men, then I formally ask you to add a new division to our knights. Oddly enough, it didn't matter how long Sal persisted in calling his divisions by their actions. The moment Newt or Theseus Scamander heard about the new division, it was renamed to their liking. To Sal's frustration, everyone else would soon use the new name instead of his descriptions. So if Sal wanted it or not, his spies were Iron Bellies, or the Dragon Division. His attack group was the Knight Division, or the Knights. His rescue teams were Smugglers, and them and his Obliviator squads, often also called Lullabies, were part of the Ghost Division. At least those names frightened and confused the enemies. Sal looked at the speaker in inquiry. The Black, being a Black, took that as a means to continue and leaned forward as well, her face determined. My cousins and I had the idea that we should attack first for once, maybe, the woman said, looking at him coolly. It was a good, if simple idea. It just had one mature flaw. Sal sighed. We're not enough people to go head-on against Grindelwald's men, he said tiredly and rubbed his face. 4 years to prepare, and yet there were only a handful of people who were willing to listen to him when it came to a possible return of Grindelwald in the near future. We can't oppose his people directly. If we did, they would win. There were grim looks all around, and more than a few of the old-timers nodded in bitter agreement. They had seen the last war. They knew what to expect, and they more than knew that the idea might be good in theory, but unmanageable in reality. This was reality. They might have some people, but compared to Grindelwald's legion, they were just a handful. They had no chance in a direct fight and no way to gather more people when most preferred to stick their heads in the sand instead to fight. The Black seemed to notice the dark faces, but wasn't discouraged by the looks of the others. Instead, her mad grin broadened. I don't propose that we go against Grindelwald's people head-on, she said, grinning. Kalidora and I had the idea of a support team to the Knights, air support. We thought about a division of light and not all too tall people. Several people blinked at that in surprise. Air support? Sal leaned forward in amusement. A light, Cassiopeia, I'm listening. The answer was a deepening smirk from Cassiopeia Black. Soon enough the smirk spread to the rest of the room as well. Dory and I talked and her idea goes like that, she said, before explaining in detail, ending with the most important part. Of course, considering that Dory's just 14 right now, she won't join us here for at least another 2 to 3 years or so. Let's hope that the war won't last that long, but she's genius and we truly should try to implement her ideas. For a moment there was silence in the room after her proposal. Then Alaric Moody spoke up from his place next to Garrick Ollivander, who was sitting to the left of Sal. "This idea has merit," he said slowly. "We will have to hash it out a bit more, but in the end it might be something that Grindelwald's men will learn to fear very soon." That, of course, sparked an avid discussion of merits and ideas for the next few minutes. "Anything else?" Newt asked after silence descended in the room once again. "Well," Ernie Prang spoke up from his corner, "I heard you had some trouble with getting the injured off the battlefield." Others nodded darkly. Ernie grinned. "Well," he said slowly, "I looked into buses, I played with them and magic a bit, and I might have a solution about that." The others exchanged a look while Sal tried not to turn green at the thought of Ernie Prang driving. "So what?" Newt finally asked. Ernie's grin just broadened and he looked at Marius, whose grin had broadened as well. "Marius and I experimented a bit," he said, grinning, "and we found out how to make my car even better hidden and useful for traveling, and then we managed to rebuild the whole magic construct onto a bus." Pollux looked at his brother, clearly a bit confused. "So what?" he asked. Marius grinned. "So we have a transport that can help with the wounded," Marius exclaimed happily, "and don't worry, we ensured that it's absolutely safe." Sal decided to not say anything at all to that. Instead, he just inclined his head to show that he had listened before asking again. "Anything else?" When nobody said anything else, he sighed and then elaborated his own troubles. "I at least need some people who will help me to recover everything we can about Grindelwald's past and his plans," he told his people, pinching his nose. "We got his name and that he's been to Durmstrang thanks to the Iron Bellies last time, but we were too preoccupied to look into it back then. I tried to do that within the last years, but his family is dead as far as I could find out, so gaining more information was next to impossible." "We'll look into it anyway," Newt replied. "I've been doing that spy thing for quite some time now, don't worry, I'll find something." Sal frowned at Newt. "You met Grindelwald in New York, Newt," he pointed out. "Even if your cover would have still been intact by some miracle after the end of the last war, that meeting—" "I'm well and truly uncovered as a spy now, I know," Newt said, and waved it away unconcerned. "And yet even in New York he still underestimated me. He knew who I was and who I had been. He knew what I had done, and yet there he was, underestimating me again." At that, Sirius Black, sitting to Sal's right, snorted. "Of course he did," he said, sounding more amused than the situation actually called for. "You've got a puppy dog face. Nobody, and I repeat, nobody ever will suspect a competent wizard when you look at them with your huge blue eyes, stuttering around and being awkward all over the place." Newt just leaned back in his chair at that, making his brother yelp when he nearly squashed him in the process. "Is that so?" he said, looking at Sirius with a sad and innocent expression on his face. "It sounds as if you're accusing me to actively trying to make people underestimate me." Sirius snorted and crossed his arms. "Stop it, baby Scamander," he said. "You can act innocent all you want. You and I know both that you have enough power and knowledge in that stick of a body to keep up with Grindelwald for more than a few minutes if you want to." Newt looked at him with a hurt expression. He stuttered. "I don't know what you mean." His hand went to his hair, carding through it in an awkward expression of unease. "It's not as if I know a lot of things if it hasn't anything to do with creatures," he pointed out, blushing slightly. Sirius rolled his eyes at the other man. "Yeah, sure," he said. "Sorry, baby Scamander. I saw you running around with a mad look on your face before, and I know better to underestimate you after you played spy for us for more years than I even want to know in Grindelwald's army." Newt's flustered face morphed into a mad grin. "Is that so?" he said, and leaned forward again, which resulted in his brother nearly tumbling to the ground and cursing to himself, and Newt that the man he had selected as his pillow had to move that much. Newt didn't even acknowledge his brother. Instead, he continued to speak as if nothing happened. "And yet Grindelwald still sees the socially awkward creature-loving magicologist when he looks at me, even after finding out that I deceived him for years." "Yes," Charles Potter injected. "But Grindelwald always only saw the mask, unlike us, who saw the devious mind behind the mask as well," Believe me, I understand why Grindelwald continues to underestimate you. But you also have to admit it's a lot harder for us to do so after seeing how dangerous it is to fall in that trap with you. Newt pouted. You're no fun, he complained before shrugging and turning to Sal. I don't plan to continue spying if that's what you fear, he said. It's more like that I plan to lead the Dragon Division. I guess I'll be your spy master from now on. I'll coordinate and all that stuff. Don't worry, I'll be good at it as well. Sal snorted and shook his head at the younger Scamander. I don't doubt it for just a second, he assured the other man, and Newt grinned. I'll look into Grindelwald's past for you, he said. I unearthed everything we needed until now. I will unearth that as well. If anything, that promise just told Sal that Newt would succeed. The man was far too damn stubborn to break a promise he made, after all, so in the end Sal just nodded and left it at that. He trusted Newt to find out at least a little bit more and in a lot less time than Sal himself had needed. The man might be a creature fanatic, but he was still one of the best intelligence officers Sal had in his team, after all. All right, he said aloud. Anything else? We'll also try to recruit some more, Theseus spoke up, and carefully leaned back onto his brother's shoulder, clearly wary of said man's constant moving around. When Grindelwald finally returns to the open, he will have his army back. If we're still as few as we are now, we won't stand a chance. If it's true that he's recruiting, there might be a way to regain some iron bellies. Newt added a bit eagerly, and his brother immediately removed himself from Newt's shoulder, fearing that the man would lean forward again. Only when nothing happened, even while Newt continued speaking, he returned to his previous position with still a wary eye on Newt. We just need some people who are dark enough that they won't look amiss if they say that they want to join his cause. Charles snorted. You do that, Newt? He said, amused. And I'll go back to Britain and look for some help over there. They kept themselves apart the last time. If Grindelwald truly returns stronger than he was, there's no way that they will be able to do that again. If they don't join, we'll simply leave them to their fate, Newt said, waving off Charles's words, nearly hitting Theseus in the process. Said brother looked at him in disgruntlement but didn't move. That should wake them up in the end. Theseus shook his head, leaning back further against his brother's shoulder. I truly wonder how more than half of the world thinks you're harmless, innocent and cute, Newt, he said. A harmless expert in magizoology, solely interested in his creatures, as if you should have been in Slytherin, not in Hufflepuff. My brother dearest. Newt flashed him a grin at that. If you say so, he said, amused. And now back to more important things than my sorting. It would take Newt some years to trace Grindelwald's family and his path in life, but in the end they found a connection they hadn't known about. One Bathilda Bagshot, Grindelwald's great-aunt, told them about the one summer he fantasized with one Albus Dumbledore about taking over the world and finding the Hallows. Not that they knew that information, but at least they finally had another source of knowledge. One Bathilda Bagshot. I have visited lairs, burrows and nests across 5 continents. Observed the curious habits of magical beasts in 100 countries, witnessed their powers, gained their trust, and on occasion beaten them off with my traveling kettle. The walk through the city was done in the twilight. Not one of them spoke until they finally reached the end of the city. The castle they were heading to, Oberberg, was situated a bit outside of Nuremberg, half hidden inside of a forest. The moated castle to Muggles would have looked as innocent as every other uninhabited castle, and yet the wizards of the Resistance could feel the wards that surrounded the castle, ensuring that Muggles wouldn't see the true castle hidden within the small-looking moated castle, and that wizards wouldn't come near the castle at all. Sal and his warders exchanged a glance. Then Sirius Black nodded and gestured for his ward breakers to start their work. The other warders stepped up next to him. The younger Arcturus Black was paired with the older Arcturus, one ward breaker, one ward holder. Pollux Black was paired with Regulus Black, Sirius Black's younger son. Sal Sanctuary was working with Lycoris Black, and Charles Potter was again Sirius Black's partner, like always. Always a ward breaker and a ward holder. Always one who was forced to take on the ward and one who might lose their lives if the wards backlashed. Be careful, Sal told them, but the determined look in the wardbreakers' faces, Sal already knew that they wouldn't listen. If they had to die to take down the wards, they would do it, and there was nothing Sal could do to stop them. When Sal inserted himself into the wards, he couldn't help but feel impressed. The wards truly were a work of art, and it was clear that after all of the attacks from the resistance, Grindelwald had learned a lot about wards. But it didn't matter how good Grindelwald was. He had not as much experience as Sal when it came to wards. There's a mistake in the Muggle wards, Sal pointed out to Sirius and Charles. We can use that mistake to ensure us an entrance into the wards. It spoke for Sirius and Charles' experience and abilities that they were able to manage to pinpoint what Sal had seen and locate the mistake as well. We will unravel the wards here, Charles told him, before Sal could even attempt to start unravel the wards himself. I'm a lot more experienced, and your experience might be needed when we confront Grindelwald, Uncle, Charles pointed out reasonably. You don't have enough magic to unravel the wards now and confront Grindelwald later. That, Sal couldn't object to, so he did the only thing he could do. He did a magical and mental backstep and let Charles and Sirius take over the unraveling of the wards. But then Sal had long since learned that he couldn't do everything alone. So on 2 years. It had taken another 2 years until they had found someone who could tell them more about the man who had slowly but surely taken other criminals under his wing and was not subtle, influencing not only politicians in the magical world but in the Muggle world as well. Last year, Grindelwald had his hands in Italy, starting the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. This year he was active in Spain, and Sal's people were trying their best to stop the man from spreading war over there. Then Newt had come with news about Grindelwald's past. Finally, Sal looked at the house in front of him. It looked old and nearly uninhabited. "And you're sure that this is the right house?" he asked the man next to him. "It is," Newt told him earnestly. Sal frowned at the house. "It doesn't look like much," he said. The other wizard frowned at it as well. "It doesn't," he said. "It's still the right address." Sal and Newt exchanged a glance with each other, then Sal stepped up to the front door and knocked. For a few minutes there was no reaction, but shortly before Sal was able to knock a second time, the door opened and admitted an elderly lady with grey-streaked blonde hair and brown eyes. She looked at them for a moment with a forbidding face until she actually looked at Sal, her eyebrow raised. "I know your face," she said, frowning. "I somehow know your face." Sal crooked his head at her, frowning as well. "Mrs. Bagshot," he said, but was stopped by her immediately. "Miss Bagshot," she corrected him. "I was never married." Sal inclined his head in understanding. "Miss Bagshot," he agreed. "This is Newton Scamander, and I'm Sal Malfoy. We're here to talk about your great-nephew Gellert." She answered with a frown, but surprisingly her attention wasn't on the part of Sal's speech about her great-nephew. "Malfoy?" she asked, frowning. "Sal Malfoy as in Salvatio?" Newt turned and looked at Sal in confusion while Sal's eyes narrowed. "Bagshot," he repeated thoughtfully. "Bathilda." "Yes?" she said. "Your father may have talked about me a time or two. I was in his ancient runes class until 1887 when I graduated." Sal frowned at her. It took a while to go over his memories and to find the right one. After 2,000 years, even with his unusually good memory, he simply couldn't remember everything. "Miss Bagshot," he agreed. "I remember." The answer was a blending smile. "So he talked about me," she said, smiling. "It's nice to know that my most beloved professor in school liked me enough that he talked about me to his son." Sal snorted. "As far as I remember, you were quite a wild girl, always making trouble," he corrected her, amused. "I'm not quite sure how that translates to him being your most beloved professor." The older woman laughed at that. "I was," she said, amused, "but he was the only one who actually looked after me anyway." Sal looked at her in surprise. "I never thought that you'd think that way," he confessed. She smiled, amused. "Like you said, I was a wild girl," she told him, "but that doesn't change the fact that I always felt like he was looking after me." Sal smiled at her, a bit amused. "It's nice to know," he said, before his smile vanished to be replaced by a severe expression. But now you might be the one to help me this time around. We need to know about Gellert. Everything you can tell us might help." Bathilda Bagshot frowned at him. "You're here because of the things he did in Europe," she said. Sal inclined his head. "I am," he told her truthfully. Her eyes narrowed. "What has the son of Salvator Malfoy to do with Gellert and his idiotic idea of ruling the world?" she asked him. Newt frowned at Sal, but Sal just looked at Bathilda calmly while contemplating his answer. In the end he decided to speak plain English. "I'm not his son," he told her, startling her. Bathilda frowned at him at that. "You look like him, and your name?" "It's the same like his," Sal confirmed. She frowned. "So how can you not be his son?" she asked him, confused. Sal sighed, but answered truthfully. "Anyway, I am he himself," he answered, "not his son. I was the one who taught you back then." She looked at him in surprise. "You look so young," she said, confused. Sal grimaced. "There's an explanation for that," he said with a sigh, "but I fear I can't tell you the reason." Bathilda looked at him in surprise, but in the end nodded and then stepped aside. "That doesn't explain what you have to do with Gellert and his way to greatness," she told him. "It doesn't," Sal answered, "but someone has to work against him, and if that has to be me, so be it." She looked at him, her face showing that she understood his reasoning, understood that there was more to his way of doing things than she knew. Then she gestured to them to enter her home. "Come on in," she said. "I will tell you everything you want to know about Gellert and his best friend Albus, Professor Malfoy." It had taken another 3 weeks until Sal had finally been able to hunt down the man who might help them by telling them more about Gellert Grindelwald's plans. "Mr. Dumbledore." The man kept moving. "Mr. Dumbledore." It was just before the man reached the 3 broomsticks that Sal finally caught up with him. "Excuse me, Mr. Dumbledore." This time the red-haired man stopped and then turned around to face him. "May I help you?" he asked pleasantly. "I hope so," Sal answered sincerely. "Would you mind giving me a few minutes of your time?" The red-haired man, one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, shook his head with a smile. "Don't worry, lad. I don't mind." Sal inwardly scowled at the moniker lad, but since Dumbledore was already in his 50s and Sal looked to be merely 20 for convenience sake, people were more agile in their 20s after all. He guessed that he would have to grit his teeth and bear it. "Do you want to talk here, or are you fine with entering this lovely etablissement and find a quiet corner in there?" the older-looking wizard asked in that moment. Sal sighed at that, but gestured to the door anyway. "Lead the way, Mr. Dumbledore," he said. Just a minute or two later they had found a quiet corner and Sal had discreetly put up a runic ward to hide their conversation from others. After they had their drinks, Dumbledore again turned to Sal. "Well, maybe you can start now with who you are and why you are here," he suggested while taking a sip of his butterbeer. Sal inclined his head at that. "I am Salvazar Malfoy," he said. "I'm from France. I came to Britain when a lead brought me here." "A lead?" "I'm researching a rising Dark Lord," Sal answered sincerely. "He's causing trouble all over Europe and it has already started to spill into the Muggle world. I'm not keen on it spilling further." Dumbledore just raised an eyebrow at that. "Spilled in the Muggle world?" he asked disbelievingly. Sal nodded darkly. "The Spanish are in a civil war right now," he said. "The Rising Dark Lord has been dabbling into their politics for some while now, and just before the war started, he pulled some strings to kickstart it. I'm not sure what he is planning, but he is using the war to not only gain followers, but also to subordinate the Spanish wizarding world bit by bit. If we don't stop him soon, he will have Spain in his clutches and will then start on to the rest of Europe. For all we know, he might start another world war in the Muggle world, just to be able to use it to hide the rest of his actions. We can't let him do that, so here I am." Dumbledore frowned at that. "I'm not quite sure why you come to me with that," he said. "I'm just a professor. If you need help, you should go to the government." At that, Sal regarded him darkly. "The man who started to rise as a Dark Lord is Gellert Grindelwald," he said finally. Dumbledore's eyebrows shot up at that, but then he leaned back and started to sip at his drink again. It still doesn't explain why you are coming to me with that, he said. Like I said, I am a mere teacher, and you were once best friends with Gellert Grindelwald. Sal intercepted. Believe me, Mr. Dumbledore, I did my research. Well, Newt did the research, but in the end it was the same. Dumbledore just frowned at that. So you came here to make me do what? Nothing grave, Sal assured the older-looking man. The only thing I need you to do is to tell me about him. What interested him? How was he like when you were friends? Were there any indications that he might turn evil? What is he after? I fear that I can't help you with that, Dumbledore replied fatherly. I also don't think that knowing anything like that will help you, lad. Sal sighed and pinched his nose. Believe me, Mr. Dumbledore, any information I gain about him will help me. We need to understand him to stop him. For all I know, he's even working on another goal behind the goals he's showing the world, and when we stop him from taking over the wizarding world, he won't be affected at all but rise to new power somewhere else, where we didn't even suspect it. I'm sorry, Mr. Malfoy, there's nothing I can do, Dumbledore replied, stopping Sal in his explanation abruptly. I don't even know how you came to the conclusion that I could help you in your quest. Grindelwald's great-aunt Bathilda Bagshot told me that you… Anyway, I fear I have to go now. Good luck with your quest, Mr. Malfoy. And with that, Dumbledore emptied his bottle of butterbeer, put down the bottle and some money and left. Sal's eyes followed him darkly. I didn't ask anything of you but to give me the information I need to stop him myself, he whispered darkly. Even if what your brother told me was true and you were in love with that man, this shouldn't have been too hard. He was partly at fault for the death of your sister, after all. And Albus Dumbledore had been his only lead. The great-aunt had not been able to help him very much, and there was no other family left. Albus Dumbledore had been his only way to gain any important information about Gellert Grindelwald, and Albus Dumbledore knew something. Sal had been able to see it in the other man's surface thoughts. Would he have had a little bit more time, he would have been able to find out what it was as well. As it was, Sal had nothing but the confirmation that Dumbledore had known Grindelwald and that the other man knew what Grindelwald was looking for. Shit. Sal guessed that he would have to do it the old-fashioned way, heading into danger without having enough information and hoping for the best like he had done in another lifetime when he had still been living in the future. If this is the reason for the Second World War, Albus Dumbledore, I won't let this slide. The true start of the war was another 3 years later when Gellert Grindelwald finally surfaced with his army and controlling the Muggles as well. Before that there had been some skirmishes with Grindelwald's men, but until now it hadn't been a full-out war, spilling in the Muggle world. Sal, my iron bellies brought some news, Newt said, stepping into their hideout. Muggle Britain and France declared war on Muggle Germany. Sal closed his eyes tiredly. He had been working tirelessly on stopping the war before it truly began, even with the knowledge that history had already happened and that there was no way for him to change it. There goes my dream of a missing world war, Sal said dryly. All right, Newt, tell the others we need to meet. Newt nodded and then left, but not without clapping Sal on the back reassuringly. A few minutes later, the elite of the resistance was situated inside the room. So, what do we do now? Jérôme Delacour asked darkly, standing stiffly at the entrance. The Muggles are at war as well, and Grindelwald… We're going to step up the war, Sal intercepted him. Oblivious squads, smugglers, everything will have to work around the developing Muggle war from now on. What about our fighting division? One of his other new advisors asked. His name was Marius, he was a squib, and their technical genius, with more knowledge about Muggle fighting tics than it might be good for Grindelwald's men. We will step it up as well, Sal said, and Marius grinned. Good, he said, satisfied. I've got some things I would like to test. Grindelwald's men soon would wish that they had never been born. Soon Grindelwald's men would cry and hide behind their mothers when just hearing his name. We also request some further training. Cassiopeia Black spoke up in that moment. You have helped my division a great deal, but we've still some issues, and I'd like you to take a look at them. You have a knack in fixing problems others struggle with for the longest. Sal just inclined his head at that. Anything else? He asked. Newt grinned. Another one of my iron bellies found one of Grindelwald's hideouts, he said. He promised to beacon it tonight, but he needs some help to take down the wards. Immediately half of the room looked at Sal pleadingly. Sal rolled his eyes. No newcomers, he said. Sirius and Regulus, back up Charles and Arcturus. Smugglers have a new route to plan. We lost the one from Germany to France, the Oblivitor squads. Lullabies. Half of the room objected. Sal rolled his eyes and continued. Have their usual hounds tonight, he said. There's a planned attack on Seville, Spain, so I need some of you there, and another planned attack in Aschaffenburg, Germany, so we have to split. He didn't even have to split his teams himself. Within minutes they had decided who went where. The rest of the wizards have guard duty, he ended the briefing. The witches stay behind tonight. Grindelwald had not a single witch in his troops. A witch didn't fight, it simply wasn't done. And yet Grindelwald feared the women of the resistance the most. Once Gellert Grindelwald was one of the most powerful wizards in the whole world. Once he was the master of chaos, the lord of Europe. No opponent could stop him ultimately. His men were the most feared, the most ruthless and the most dangerous men in the wizarding world. Muggles listened to him, and starting a war was a child's play, yet this was before he was about to regain exactly that fearsome influence he once had in the First World War, and would sometimes in the future regain before the Second World War. Of course, in 1939 he yet hadn't regained his influence at all, and because of that, his people were a lot more susceptible to superstition and fallacy. To Gellert Grindelwald's misfortune, the resistance had been able to utilize that fear to their own merit. Sirius, Charles, you take the wards, Sal said, while leaning over the map in front of him. Sure thing, Sal, was the immediate answer from both of them. They'll be down in half an hour or less. Good, Sal nodded in agreement. Garrick, Oblivators. Of course, Uncle. Lullabies to me. I'll ensure that you'll be in position before the wards come down, Ollivander said, smiling creepily. Sal rolled his eyes at the fake shivers of the other Oblivators. Olaric smugglers, he said, instead of saying something about the mentality of the lullabies. I knew I would get stuck with them. Olaric grumbled good-naturedly. First I raised them to be the best, and yet I'm unable to get rid of them. Should have seen that coming before I got roped in. There was snickers all around at that, and some of the other smugglers, those that ensured that people got to safety while the fight continued, shot some harmless prank spells at him. Jérôme Thissé, diversion, Sal continued. Do you think that I could ask some of Grendel's men to play Quidditch with me? Theseus Scamander asked, amused. I could help you in organizing it, Jérôme said, grinning. Sale snorted while the others called out different suggestions. Whatever else they could do. Archie, my name is Arcturus. Sanctuary. My name is Malfoy. Archie. Shut up. A spell was lazily thrown at Sal but hit a shield instead of him. Sal rolled his eyes in amusement. Arcturus. Direct attack. Sal told the young heir of black. The 24-year-old man rolled his eyes at him. Of course, direct attack, he said matter-of-factly. What else? I'm far too danger-addicted to work with the wards. I wish you weren't, his father, Lord Sirius Black, spoke up with a sigh. Some of the other blacks sighed as well or rolled their eyes at them. Sal just continued on. Newt, intelligence, he said. Sure thing, Newt said. The Dragon Division is ready to go. There were some more discussions, but in the end the resistance was ready to go. All right, Sal said, let's go. He stood up. But just before he actually left the room, he turned back once more to look at the women in the room. His eyes raked over them. He knew that in Grindelwald's army, no woman was allowed to fight. In the end, he smiled at them while deciding what to do with the women who were part of the resistance. They were women after all. Witches. They were light, not as strong, and thanks to the structure of the resistance, not involved in the knights, the smugglers, or the lullabies. Witches, he told them, stay behind. With that, Sal and the others left, the witches staying back, like demanded. Grindelwald's men were in the middle of organizing their own raid, when death descended upon them. It would take overhearing the talk of the people in the resistance to give death a name, but the fear was sown that day. It was late in the evening and dark when it happened. 1 second, everything was normal, and the next, the wards they were under broke and hell descended. There were explosions, spells out of nowhere, and above it all was death, riding beneath broomstick, not on it, but bound to them and steered by the ankles. The riders were lighter than most men and smaller, wearing form-fitting black clothes and masks. If people would actually see them better against the dark night sky, they would have seen that every rider was female. They all were equipped with explosive potions and their wands. Later in the war, with the entrance of Mad Marius, their equipment would get even more deadly. Grindelwald's men had nothing to counter their attack. The moment the Black Rider descended upon them, they were the prey instead of the predator. Darkdosh! The potions exploded around them. Garatois. Men fell to spells, landed on the floor screaming when potions hit him. Piadad! The wards which had come down around them gave way to the knights of the resistance. Arctung. Muggles, who had been captured by Grindelwald's men, were freed by the smugglers and the lullabies of the resistance. Agachos. Tents caught fire, people ran around without rhyme or reason. Or succour. There was fear and chaos everywhere. Hilf. There were people fleeing and screaming. Socorro. And everywhere the resistance was winning against Grindelwald's men. Help! Yes, the entrance of the witches into the war was something that Grindelwald would never forget and would never be able to counter. He had his dragon division, but the dragons were less flexible, less fast and less agile. They had nothing to counter the fast broom division of Sal Sanctuary's resistance. Of course, the moment Theseus and Newt Scamander heard about the division, the name changed from the broom division to something a bit more fanciful. "How are the night witches?" Theseus asked with a grin, the moment the resistance met after their first aggressive fight against Grindelwald's men. "The night witches are formidable, exactly like I knew they would be." Calidora Black exclaimed proudly. The other blacks who entered behind her snorted. "Of course you were formidable. You were led by blacks." Pollux Black, one of the younger blacks, snickered. Sirius Black playfully swatted him. "Shush you," he said, amused. "Stop bragging, even if it's actually true." "Blacks!" Charles Potter exclaimed, amused, and stepped in behind the Black family. "Oh, shut it, Potter," Sirius said, grinning, and searched his place at the table. Yes, Grindelwald's men gained a new nightmare the day the night witches descended upon them the first time. Of course, it didn't help that not a lot of time later, young Marius Black, a squib who had been taught Muggle science thanks to his family, decided to add to the concept. "You know," Marius said, leaning over the wing he was currently working on, "those potions combined with that little explosive will make a nice big bang." "Oh," Doria Black said, and leaned down to look at the potion her brother had pointed to. "It will?" Marius nodded enthusiastically. "It will," he assured the young girl. "And then there's that. It works like a flash of light. Combine it with this potion and the wards it will be thrown at might self-combust, as long as there's a ward to hide them from Muggles active." "Oh," Doria said. "Nice. Do I get one of those too?" Marius looked at his sister with a frown. "That's your first flight," he pointed out. Doria returned his look with pleading eyes. Marius cackled. "Don't worry, sweetie," he told his sister. "I have far better things for you." Of course, in the end it would be on the battlefield that Doria and Charles Potter would interact for the first time. The only thing Doria would later say to that would be, "It was love from the first spell." But then, that's known to happen in Love and War. Grindelwald's men, on the other hand, would gain 2 more nightmares with the entrance of the siblings from Hell, one Mad Marius and one Doria Potter. Of course, it didn't help that they would hear the name of the Broom Division for the first time from Doria's mouth and misunderstanding it. Years later, the Night Witches were forgotten, but the name Grindelwald's men had for them would follow them even into the first war against Voldemort and his Death Eaters. "Nostexin, Nostexin," Grindelwald's men cried when the moon showed the black wings full of poisons, potions and mad experiments of the Night Witches. "By Merlin and Morgana, Night Witches, run for your lives." Sadly, a warning like that, always came way too late for Grindelwald's men. You're a Ligelimens? Yeah. But I always have trouble with your kind Brits. It's the accent. They were half through the rest of the wards when Sirius and Charles finally managed to poke a hole into the wards, using the mistake Sal had pointed out to them, a hole big enough to let through some of the people. Of course, that was also the time everything started to turn wrong. There's another ward hidden. Sadly, Sal's warning came too late. The hidden ward had already been triggered before Sal was able to warn Sirius and Charles. The hole in the wards had triggered another set of wards, a set that alerted Grindelwald of their coming. A second later, Grindelwald's men were swarming the Bailey of Nurmengard. The moment the men turned up, Alaric Moody took up his position as one of the leaders of the resistance. "Jarum," he called out, "the left flank. Prince, the right. Smugglers, try to get through. Now." Sal turned his attention back to the wards, but was stopped to emerge himself into their structure by his godson. "Uncle Sal," Charles called out the moment he noticed the alert ward they had triggered. "We can't all continue to hold the wards. You are our leader. Your part in this isn't by the wards, it's by keeping Grindelwald from our men." For a moment Sal wanted to object, but when he saw the first of his men fall to Grindelwald's hands, he finally handed over the wards to one of the other more competent people when it came to wards, one Garrick Ollivander. Of course, this wouldn't be the last thing that went wrong that day that would end the Second Grindelwald War. But then the whole war had gone wrong long before that point in time, especially when it came to one Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, 1940. Sal was in Britain again. Actually, he shouldn't be here. He had enough to do as it was. Within the last few years, he had organized the resistance, started to smuggle people out of the countries in Grindelwald's grasp, especially those that refused to bow to him and their families, and organized counterattacks to slow down Grindelwald's takeover of Europe. Sal also was the one who organized the Obliviator squads that tried to stop the leaking of the existence of magic into the Muggle world. The consequences of Sal's actions were numerous, especially for him. He was bone-tired, he hadn't had a bath for days, and his robes were in a worse condition than even Sirius Black's when he met the man in third year. And yet Sal was standing in front of the Wizengamot in Britain, a plea for help on his lips. "Europe will fall if you don't help us now," he pleaded. "If you don't want to send fighters, don't, but taking in refugees, sending supplies, anything could help us against Grindelwald. Even if it's just voluntary assistance by your people, whatever help we gain would be welcomed. Just think about it, please." He had been talking to them for 2 hours now, had explained why he asked them for help, what they were fighting and how it would affect the British wizarding world if it didn't step in now. He had brought up all his abilities in politics to get those men in front of him to understand, but we all know that the typical British citizen has no chance at surviving a war against Grindelwald, Albus Dumbledore said. "He's also statuated just over the channel in France. You and I know that your little group of fighters won't be any help to us if we declare war on Grindelwald. He will swamp us with his army and destroy us before the day ends." "I'm not talking about a direct attack," Sal countered tiredly. "I'm talking about subtly helping us. I am talking about aiding fellow wizards and witches who had to flee their homes, children who— I think we all know that you want us to fight your war for you, Mr. Malfoy," Dumbledore intercepted. "Believe me, I have heard your fellows pleading often enough to know what you want. You aren't the first who came to me asking me to take on Grindelwald." "I'm not asking you to fight Grindelwald," Sal protested heatedly. "I'm asking you to help us. I'm asking for supplies, for sanctuary, mayhap even for healers. That has nothing to do with asking Britain to join the war, and especially nothing with asking you to do so, Mr. Dumbledore." "Lord Dumbledore," Dumbledore corrected coolly, and Sal closed his eyes, defeatedly. He wouldn't gain any help here today. Sure, he could take the throne and force them, but he also knew that by taking the throne he would make Britain a greater target on Grindelwald's list. He wasn't willing to risk even more innocence just to gain a few more fighters. No, Britain had to join the war as it was, because then it was just another country among many targets, just like it had been all along. Having a king would change that because a king had power over the land and could draw more magic from it like the average witch or wizard. There was also the fact that everybody with magic born in the land of a king was automatically sworn to him by birth, so if Sal took the throne and asked, everybody would fight for him until he asked them to stop or they died. There was a reason why Grindelwald had gone after the ruling families of Europe the last time he had tried to rise to power. Grindelwald, being raised in Durmstrang, would know that, and he would see the threat in a fully united Britain and would act to stop them even if he had to annihilate the whole country, which he would have to do if Sal as a king asked them to fight. So convincing had been Sal's only option. Regretfully, Albus Dumbledore had refused to even truly listen to his pleadings, and the man had a lot of influence in the Wizengamot, thanks to the friendships he could claim and the magical power he wielded. "I am sorry, Mr. Malfoy," the minister said in that moment, "but Britain won't enter into the war you have with Gellert Grindelwald." At that, Sal turned his deathly green eyes towards the British minister. "As you wish," he said coolly. "Just don't expect us to help you if you need aid in the future." And with a last glance at Albus Dumbledore, he left. 1940. The last mission was a catastrophe. Grindelwald's men had been more prepared for them than they had anticipated, and that had cost them dearly. Theseus Scamander was leaning heavily on his brother, who was bleeding from his head. Charles Potter was unable to stand any more, both of his legs broken. Jérôme Delacour was unconsciousness and Salah was leaning over him, also heavily bleeding from a chest wound, while trying to ensure that the man whose heart nearly had been ripped out would live. Not too far away from them, the Blacks were surrounding one of the fallen, one Cygnus Black. They had won the fight, but the price had been high. Too high. The only one who was halfway in any condition to do anything else was Alaric Moody, who was hurt but at least still alive and well enough to stand. It was him who in the end raised his wand into the sky, waiting for the one transport that they always could count on. Just a second later there was a loud blast, and then a violet bus was standing there, the side of the bus having printed on 3 words, "The Night Bus." The next moment the door of the bus opened and Ernie Prang stepped out. He looked around, his eyes grave. "We need help," Alaric told him while holding his side. "You will have to bring us back to headquarters immediately." Ernie's grave eyes swept over the wounded and dead. "Of course," he said before stepping up to help Charles Potter stand. "Let me take care of you." The moment Ernie Prang had left the hurt and wounded at headquarters under Sal's care, he turned around to return to his night bus, his face determined. He was just surprised when he was met at the bus by Newt Scamander, whose head had been bandaged but not healed. "Newt," Ernie said, but it was Newt who intercepted any objection the other man might have wanted to utter. "Cygnus is dead," he said, his voice a lot cooler than even the Resistance was used to when he was in any kind or way serious. "I will not stand by and wait until the others are back to health to get my revenge. Grindelwald shall feel my wrath now, so that he finally knows that attacking and hurting us won't go unpunished in any way or form. And we won't let you two go alone," another dark-looking man added while stepping up behind Ernie. Ernie turned just to look into Alaric Moody's and Garrick Ollivander's icy eyes. All right," Ernie stuttered. The 4 grinned at each other maliciously. To their surprise, this was when Marius Black stepped out of the shadows of the night bus. "Let me help," he said, his eyes gleaming with darkness. "They killed my father. I have every right to help." Next to him, Doria Black stepped up, her eyes as fierce and dark as her brother's, her sister Cassiopeia and her cousins Calidora and Cedrella following her, their eyes as serious as their sisters'. When the war would be recorded later on, this would be recorded as the day that Grindelwald had one of his greatest setbacks in the entire war. After that day, his people would truly fear a few names of Sal's Sanctuary's resistance. "Nartaxon," they cried. "Night Witches, run for your lives." But this time, there was no mercy, and not a lot of survivors. The night bus, duck. But explosions, thanks to potions thrown by Newt, couldn't be stopped that easily. "It's Mad Marius. Run away as fast as you can." But the madman, drenched in blood of his enemies and the insane black grin on his face, was unstoppable even with magic. This would be the night Grindelwald would learn to fear Mad Marius even more than he ever feared, or would ever fear the rest of the Blacks. When Grindelwald's men would throw down their weapons the next time Mad Marius would take a step onto the battlefield, Sal would only raise an eyebrow at Mad Marius's uncle. "Seems like your nephew managed to gain a bit more of a reputation than you ever had," he said dryly to the other man. Sirius just raised an eyebrow at Sal. "Truly?" he asked, interestedly and slightly sarcastically. "I thought it was normal that people would flee from my nephew when he cackles like he does right now." Sol snorted. "Guess that could it be as well," he answered, before turning back to the rest of their one battle. "But then, whatever it is, I won't object to the consequences it brings with it." From then on, not a lot of Grindelwald's men would dare to fight against Mad Marius or any of his associates, like Newt Scamander, Garrick Ollivander and Alaric Moody. Of course, not once would a follower of Gellert Grindelwald ever enter the night bus, even in the future, way after the war. The last years had been one of the hardest Sal ever lived through, and with his years of experience that meant something. He had worked against Grindelwald since the raising of said man, and it was solely thanks to his organization that the wizarding world was still hidden from the Muggle world. Of course, the Second World War, in part courtesy of Grindelwald, had helped to hide magic as well, but a lot of it had been thanks to Sal's underground organization. Sal's people had worked ceaselessly to not only keep magic hidden but also to pull out endangered families and organize disruptions of Grindelwald's operations. Grindelwald had long since gotten irritated by them, but until now he hadn't been able to find their headquarters or their leader. There were some advantages of being a few thousand years old and having more knowledge of magic than anybody else. Still, it had taken Sal years to organize everything. His first priority had always been the people and their safety, so taking down Grindelwald had to wait until Sal had been reasonably sure that even if something went wrong, the innocent would have a way to hide from Grindelwald. "Still, you look like you contemplate falling down dead right here," a man next to Sal said in that moment, and Sal looked up tiredly. "Pollux," he greeted the man. The dark-haired, 33-year-old man was one of his advisors. "Pollux Nicholas Black. The Ukrainian Ironbelly got us the ward scheme. Charles Potter says that he can do it," Pollux said when he saw that he had Sal's attention. "Regulus is his backup, and Uncle Sirius and Arcturus are willing to take on the second ward the moment Charles has brought down the first." Sal nodded at that. "What about the rest of the wards and the attack itself?" he asked, while turning back his main attention to the potion he had been brewing. "I'm not willing to risk it if we don't have a chance after taking down the attack wards on Numengard." It was odd that it were the Blacks of all the wizarding families of Britain who had decided to screw the politics of their country and had left to help in a war the British still tried to ignore. Not that they could do that anymore since Grindelwald had finally started to attack them just a few months ago. The Blacks instead had joined Sal's organization just a few months after Sal's last stint to Britain and had been with him ever since. Cygnus Black had even died in the war just 2 years ago, and with the Blacks had come some of their allies. The heir of House Potter, Charles, the heir of House Moody, Alaric, and some more like Prince Knot and Greengrass. All in all, they weren't a lot, but they brought good counsel and a lot of magical knowledge and power. They were a blessing for Sal's resistance. "The attack group is assembled," Pollux replied. "Alaric Moody and Iacomus Prince are leading the left flank attack. Jérôme Delacour and Garrick Ollivander the right. Pablo Eugenides and Constantin Krum are willing to lead the primary attack group, and Johannes Eichinger told me that he and his daughter Loni would be willing to take down the rest of the wards. The Ukrainian Iron Belly will pull out his people the moment the wards fall, and they will take over as a backup if anything goes wrong, but since they aren't many, we definitely shouldn't rely on them solely." Sal nodded at that. "All right," he said, "tell Geronimo Rossi that I need his team as backup for the main attack. I won't risk too much of us going in without any other backup in place." Pollux nodded at that, and Sal turned down the heat by pulling the cauldron of the flames. "The attack will be tomorrow morning. I want everybody at the best condition, so go to bed early. I'll be done here in half an hour and then I'll take a nap as well." Pollux snorted at that. You, Sal Sanctuary, need more than a nap to be even half awake tomorrow morning, he said, and Sal rolled his eyes. I promise I'll sleep the next 5 years the moment we've taken down Grindelwald, he answered dryly, and stop calling me that, I'm not a place. Pollux snickered at that. No, you aren't, he said, but you can't deny that the moment you are somewhere, everybody else around you is safe. Besides, you have objected to that nickname for years now. What makes you think that we will change it now when we're preparing the, hopefully last attack on Grindelwald? Oh, come on now, brother. He's hopeless. He will never accept that he can't escape that nickname ever again. Another man intercepted before Sal could even think about replying. Pollux snorted at that. Right you are, little brother, he said, amused. How are the distractions coming along? I keep getting distracted, the other man, Marius Black, replied dryly. Now, tell me again why I am the one working on them. Because they're technology and I'm bonkers at it, Pollux suggested. Nope, keep going, Marius said while raising an eyebrow. Because my magic would blow them up if I got frustrated. Pollux tried again. Marius thought that over before shaking his head. Could be valid, but isn't accepted. Pollux frowned at that before deciding to go for the killing blow. Because you are my little brother and you are awesome. At that, Marius nodded gravely. Exactly, and don't you dare to forget that. Years later, Marius would be blown of the family tree by Walburga Black, his own niece, for being a squib, but at that point of time not one of the Blacks cared, and so, when Marius had insisted in joining the fight against Grindelwald, Sirius Black, the Lord of Black only had asked one question. All right, what can you do? And just like that, Sal's resistance had gained a technological defense that left Grindelwald's men reeling. Not one of them had ever figured out what spells Sal's men were using, no wonder, since technology definitely wasn't explainable with magic. The resistance loved it. And just like that, they also loved their technological genius in their midst. So, Sal, what else do you need me to do for tomorrow? Some more bombs? Some electric shock equipment? Some awesome light show? Sal just rolled his eyes at that, and then shooed away Pollux with the words, off you go. I've still some work to do for tomorrow, before explaining in detail what he needed from Marius. The next day was hell on earth, a hell that would never leave Sal's mind ever again. When Sal let go of the wards to take on Grindelwald's men, he had no idea that this would be the last time he would see some of his men ever again. Alaric Moody would die that day. Sirius Black, Regulus Black, Lycoris Black and the older Arcturus Black would lose years of their lives that day. And in the end, the history would write itself like Sal had been taught it all those thousands of years ago. When the attack of Grindelwald's men came to its peak, it were the ward breakers who decided to sacrifice themselves for their comrades. It's us or them, Sirius Black panted. Either we break the wards and take the backlash, or we watch our comrades die right now. Sirius, Charles said, his eyes wide, knowing what his friend was asking him to. Sirius just looked at him gravely. There's no other way, he told his best friend. No other way. The other Blacks and Garrick Ollivander nodded. Charles sighed, but in the end gave in. We even it out. If we lose our lives, we will lose it all together. Do you understand, Black? Only when Sirius and the others nodded, Charles turned back to the wards and ripped them down instead of dismantling them gently. The backlash went through him and hit his wardholder Sirius Black. The other ward breakers and wardholders just followed their example. In the end, the backlash of the wards would not only hit the warders, but also confuse Grindelwald's men, an advantage which would ensure that the resistance would gain the upper hand and Grindelwald's men started fleeing. It would be a decade later when Charles Potter understood that Sirius Black had lied to him that day. Like Regulus Black, who would die 1959 at 53 years of age, Arcturus Nugulus Black, who would die also 1959 at 75 years of age, and Lycoris Black, who would die 1965 at 61 years of age. Sirius Black had taken the brunt of it and would die in 1952 at 75 years of age. The decision of the Black family would cut short the ages of several of their members for more than just a few decades of their lives. And even Sal, who stopped to stabilize the fallen warders after Grindelwald's men had retreated, couldn't change that the Blacks' lives had been cut short. And Sal would never forgive Dumbledore for disregarding this sacrifice of the Black family and belying it in Britain with his words alone, words that were believed more than the words of an unknown cousin of the Potters, a Hogwarts dropout, a mad wand maker, or a Black. In the end, the only thing that Sal could do was to stabilize the warders who had suffered the backlash and rush on. Grindelwald's people were many, but Sal had been planning the attack for years, and his people knew exactly what to do. Even if they were less, they were winning. Marius's bombs, granates, and other electronic devices, all usable the moment the wards came down, were definitively effective if it came to taking out a lot of people at once. So naturally, they were winning. That was until Grindelwald entered the fight. He swung his wand at Sal's people, ready to take them down with one strike, when Sal stopped him by drawing a ward into the air and releasing it just in time to prevent the attack. Sal's ward shattered under the brunt force of Grindelwald's attack, but his people remained unharmed, and Grindelwald turned his eyes onto Sal. It seems that the pathetic group calling itself Resistance has some undeveloped potential in its midst, he said, scrutinizing Sal coolly. Sal returned Grindelwald's gaze with a deadly green glare. I don't think that my abilities are undeveloped, he said coolly. After all, you haven't found me or our hideout for more than 25 years. At that, Grindelwald raised an eyebrow. Ah, the mysterious Sal Sanctuary, he said, and Sal wanted to groan. He was known to his enemy by that name. I heard that you visited my dungeons some time ago and decided to leave there with most of my prisoners. Sal shrugged at that. I've always been interested in dungeons, he said, and your prisoners were freezing. I thought that they would feel better elsewhere. Grindelwald snarled at that before launching his attack on Sal. Sal knew that he had no chance in winning the fight if he concentrated on brute force. Grindelwald was a powerful, fully grown wizard. Sal, on the other side, had the magic of an average 15-year-old. He couldn't win in brute force, but he didn't plan on it. Pulling out his wand with his right hand, he did a shield spell while at the same time he started to draw runes in the air with his left. When the spells of Grindelwald reached him, he ducked. His shield spell shattered, but the curses hurled over his head harmlessly anyway. Grindelwald laughed when he saw the shield spell shatter. Seems as if you have taken on a little bit too much. Sal Sanctuary, he cried, amused. Sal refrained from answering and instead hurled a silent spell towards the Dark Lord. Said Lord did a shield spell and then managed to duck out of the way just in time when Sal's spell wasn't stopped by his shield like he had intended. Well, there were advantages in being a very old being. Knowing spells everybody else had forgotten was one of them. He could see the surprise in the Dark Wizard's eyes when the spell went through the shield and the Dark Wizard had barely enough time to duck out of the way of the spell. Sal threw out his runes. Grindelwald, meanwhile, had cast attack spells again, and Sal dodged, knowing that the strength in the spells would shatter his shield again. Sal returned the spell fire with another 2 spells, all the while watching his runic spell creeping through the stones of the walls and floors of Numengard. There wouldn't be a lot of prisoners left when Sal's spell was done, and Sal's group would have some more help from those who had been held prisoner until now. Not that Sal's group needed help. While Sal preoccupied Grindelwald, his people had started to take down Grindelwald's troops as if those were ants and not fully grown wizards. The little task forces Sal's group had splitted in were a lot more agile than the army-trained wizards of Grindelwald. Adding to that their unusual technological equipment, some of it solely invented for the war against Grindelwald, and the other knickknacks Marius had insisted that they would take with them. And the other side looked oddly ill-equipped to deal with the resistance. The military-like group of dark wizards truly had no chance. And Sal guessed that they would have won against Grindelwald like they planned it if the British wizards hadn't interfered suddenly. As it was, the British wizards appeared just before Sal's people were able to take down the last of Grindelwald's men, wands blasting and hitting people left, right and center, not caring if they hit Sal's people or Grindelwald's. 3 of Sal's people went down within the first minute and didn't get up again. Sal cursed and activated the emergency runes he had on his people, shielding them before the British could kill them with their careless spells. That distraction used Grindelwald. With a single spell he hit Sal, throwing him against the wall. "Well, little wizard," Grindelwald said, grinning, "seems like I am winning." Sal snarled at him, but he was still empowering the runic shields around his men, so using complex magic was out. It was oddly like shielding Camelot back when he had still been young and naive. But that didn't mean that Sal was without a way out. Without hesitation he pulled one of his daggers and rammed it into Grindelwald's side. The Dark Lord hissed and let go of him to hold his injured side. Then he looked up at Sal darkly. "You are something else, aren't you, Sal Sanctuary?" he said, half impressed sounding, half amused. "Muggle weapons against a wizard, that's something I definitely haven't heard of before." Sal grinned at that, showing the dark wizard a bloodied smile. "You have no idea what else I'm capable of, Grindelwald," he said, but before he could do more, another spell slammed into him, hurling him out of the way, and then Dumbledore entered the scene. "Stop baiting children, Gellert," Dumbledore said, and Grindelwald turned to look at his one-time friend. "I wasn't baiting any children," he said icily, and Sal wondered if it was wrong of him to suddenly feel a bit of kinship with the Dark Lord in front of him. "I have eyes in my head, Gellert," Dumbledore said. "I saw what you were doing." Grindelwald snarled at that before turning to Sal. "I fear I will have to take a break in our duel. I need to take out another idiot first," he said to Sal, and Sal blinked at that. "The Dark Lord with manners, huh? Sure, go ahead," Sal said, amused. He had definitely enough to do with shielding his own people without adding the troubles of fighting Grindelwald to his worries. So while Dumbledore and Grindelwald engaged into their epic battle, Sal turned towards his men and the trouble they were in thanks to the British. "Stop it now," he hissed at the British, who tried to herd of his men together with Grindelwald's. "Some of them are mine, and I definitely won't let you take them as if they were some kind of criminals. You were all part of Grind." One of the British started when finally Arcturus Black, the heir of House Black, managed to come to the front. "We were fighting those bastards, you dunderheads," he said coolly. "Or do you truly think that you could have apparated in here without us taking down the wards just half an hour ago? I swear to you, if my father dies out there because you dunderheads decided to destroy our operation by barging in here without being invited, I will call a blood feud with you." It took just a minute for the British to recognize Arcturus Black. "Heir Black?" he exclaimed. "I thought you were in the Resistance." "I am, dunderhead, like the most of us are. Or do you think it's natural for Grindelwald's men to fight each other?" At that, the British looked at each other sheepishly before releasing not only Arcturus but everyone else he told them to. Then Arcturus turned to Sal. "You mind taking a look at my cousin Pollux and at my brother and father?" he asked, and Sal shook his head. "Gather the wounded outside," he said. "I'll treat them there." And with that, he left. In the end, Dumbledore was hailed the defeater of Grindelwald, and 10 of Sal's men were dead, 13 others' lives were cut short, they would die within the next 10 to 20 years, and another 15 were scarred for life. Considering that Sal had gone in with only 50 men, a lot of them had gotten hurt, and at least half of them wouldn't have been if the British hadn't intercepted their mission. "You should be thankful that we came when we came," Dumbledore told him after Grindelwald had been restrained. "You would have been annihilated within the next 5 minutes." Sal just stared at the man in front of him. "I would have preferred it if you hadn't meddled," he said coolly, and Dumbledore patted his head. "You don't have to thank me, lad," he said. "I don't think he was," Arcturus Black said in that moment, stepping up next to Sal. "Was it your idea to come here with your people?" "Of course," Dumbledore answered. "I noticed that the wards of Numengard lost its strength, so we decided to come and use the chance we got. I guess that you did the same." Sal gritted his teeth at that. "My father and brother shortened their lives to bring down the wards," Arcturus said icily. "My uncle Cygnus and a lot of others died to ensure that we even got to that point. We didn't simply wait until the wards lost its strength." "It was a little misunderstanding," Dumbledore said. "My men definitely didn't plan on killing some people of the Resistance. We're all on the same side, after all." At that, Arcturus looked at Sal, and Sal closed his eyes. No, Mr. Dumbledore, Sal finally said. We're not. If we were, we would have fought side by side from the beginning. And with that he turned away. He had enough. He had begged the man in front of him to help them for years. He hadn't begged for someone to fight his battles, but to either fight with him or at least help him and his men in any other way. Britain had refused. Dumbledore had refused. Neither of them could ever claim that they were on the same side like Sal and his men. It was a win for both of us, Dumbledore said. We won today because of the good cooperation between us. So of course it's our victory. Of course we are on the same side. Arcturus just looked at Dumbledore icily. The House of Black refuses to ever again be named next to the House of Dumbledore, he said. At least not until House Dumbledore recognizes the debt it now owes House Black. Dumbledore frowned at that. We saved you and your men, Heir Black, he said. You should be thankful to us, even if you might be bitter for the hurt my men inflicted upon your family without meaning to. Sal just shook his head when Arcturus opened his mouth to say something else. He won't understand, Sal said. He's blinded by the fact that your leader lacks the magic to even think about taking on someone like him head-on. He's blinded by the fact that we were few and the enemy many. He's blinded enough so that he will never understand what we have done today and what he did by entering into a fight that wasn't his. Let him have his glory. Let him have his power. He has just lost the most important thing. He has lost the trust of several families not only in Europe but in Britain as well. With that, Sal walked off. For a moment Arcturus stood there, scrutinizing Dumbledore. If my family will ever have to choose again, not one of them will ever work for you again. We might help the Potters when the Potters help you. We might help others who are connected to you, but when you ask us who we will choose, them or you, it will always be them. We will never work with you again, even if it means we will have to choose a Dark Lord over you. And with that he followed Sal. And I guess that my own child will never go to Hogwarts, Newt Scamander said darkly. You might have fought for me back then when I needed help, and I still respect you for that, but that's not enough to not keep my family at a distance from your interesting ways of thinking. Then Newt followed Sal. The rest of Sal's people did the same. Dumbledore would never understand why the Blacks and a lot of others stopped supporting him in the Wizengamot. He would forever blame Voldemort for the split of the Wizengamot between dark, light and neutral, never understanding that the split hadn't occurred with Voldemort but with the day he won against Grindelwald and refused to acknowledge the sacrifice those families made so that his duel was even possible. Of course, Dumbledore never even felt a little bit of regret, even after finding Alaric Moody's body killed by one of the men Dumbledore had brought with him. And whatever Sal tried to tell the British wizarding world, in the end, the resistance consisted of a disregarded Potter, a Potter who couldn't reveal himself as the heir if he didn't want the political backlash to hit the House of Potter, a mad wand maker, an even made-a creature fanatic, the evil Black family, and a man not known to anybody anymore. No, in the end, Dumbledore's version would be the truth in Great Britain, and Sal would never forgive the future headmaster of Hogwarts, who destroyed the sacrifice of the men and women who fought by Sal's side for all those years. But then he wasn't the only one, even if others would never say it as plainly as the Blacks or Sal Malfoy himself. It would take months to contradict every other wild assertion in Miss Skeeter's book. It is true that I was the first person ever to capture Gellert Grindelwald, and also true that Albus Dumbledore was something more than a school teacher to me. More than this I cannot say, without fear of breaching the official Magical Secrets Act or, more importantly, the confidences that Dumbledore, most private of men, placed in me. Venerated lords and ladies of the Wizengamot fudge, exclaimed, standing in front of the hurriedly called-in Wizengamot, his back straight and his determination showing on his face. This unscheduled Wizengamot meeting has been called by me to determine the threat Albus Dumbledore is to our world. At that the other Wizengamot members looked at each other with frowns on their faces. It weren't all Wizengamot members present. One of the most important members missing were the Malfoys, something that no Death Eater who was sitting in the Wizengamot was surprised about, considering that they believed the Malfoys to be killed by the Order. Those Wizengamot members who were part of the Order, on the other hand, weren't surprised as well, considering that Snape reported the Malfoys missing without a trace. Yet there were still a lot of Wizengamot members present, and some of them hadn't been seen for years, or weren't members at all as far as Fudge knew. Nevertheless, Fudge continued with his prepared speech to get the Wizengamot members on his side. The last article in the Daily Prophet by Oliver Twist, Fudge spoke the name with a grimace. He still wasn't happy about Twist, but after the last article he had at least to admit that Twist could be useful sometimes. Showed us that Dumbledore isn't just old and possibly a bit insane like we determined in the last summer, but also very, very dangerous. At that, the first Wizengamot members started to object. It weren't a lot, considering that Dumbledore's followers had diminished over the last half a year, but still there were some who objected immediately. "What kind of threat are you talking about, Minister?" one of Dumbledore's people asked with a frown. "He's not a threat. He defeated Grindelwald and he's working against you-know-who. We should be grateful that it is him who commands Hogwarts and therefore that potential spy network and not somebody else." Others agreed with that, but Fudge decided to ignore them. Think about what kind of power Dumbledore has just thanks to a simple post as a teacher in our most important school. Our only school. Someone shouted from the back. "Do you truly want a man who's old at best and at worst delusional, in charge of your family secrets?" Fudge continued. "We need to relieve him of his post. If we don't, there will be no stopping him anymore after he unveils his power. If we don't stop him, he will declare himself king of the magical world within the next few years." At that, there was a loud laugh from the back of the rows of the Wizengamot. Everybody present turned to the person in the back. A man in the robes of the Wizengamot embroidered with a crest that hadn't been seen in at least 15 years. "You are laughing, Lord." Fudge trailed off, the name of the man escaping him. Even the crest the man was wearing was foreign to him. "Lovegood," the man supplied his last name and leaned forward in his seat. "But I am no lord, so Mr. will do." Fudge frowned at the man. "You are wearing the robes of a Wizengamot member," he pointed out, a bit confused. "I do," Lovegood assured him. "But then I am a member of this ruling body by proxy after all." At that, Lovegood looked around the room as if he was unsure if that was a good thing or not. How by Merlin did a commoner get a proxy seat of a Wizengamot member? One of the Dark Fraction asked, disgusted. Fudge frowned at that as well. He would have never allowed someone like Lovegood in here as a part of the Wizengamot as a proxy, and yet Lovegood was here anyway. Lovegood smiled softly. "I believe my something great aunt married into the family," he replied. "Since that makes me the nearest living relative, I am the proxy." "Surely there should have been someone closer related," Fudge commented with a frown. Lovegood just shrugged. "They died, so here I am." Then his smile returned and broadened. "And maybe that's good, considering the stupidity that seems to have caught some of the members of this venerable body." Fudge frowned at that. He somehow felt insulted, even if he wasn't actually sure why. "I assure you we are all quite intelligent in here," he finally settled on to say. The other man just laughed at that again. "You told us that you want to stop Dumbledore because you believe he wants to take up the crown," Lovegood pointed out, still amused. "Because that's the most logical conclusion, especially after all the evidence Oliver Twist gave us in his article," Fudge exclaimed. Lovegood just raised his eyebrow at that. "Evidence that he wants the crown?" he asked Fudge, amused. "He doesn't want the crown, and even if he wanted to, the Eternal Prince wouldn't let him have it. And you don't want to get the prince mad, not him, never him." There was a half-insane smile in the Lovegood's face when he told them that. Fudge frowned. "What by Merlin are you talking about, Lovegood?" he growled at the man in the back. Lovegood leaned forward even further. "There's just so much I could be talking about," he said, smiling amused. "But I'm only here for one thing to say. I warn you, Fudge, and I warn you now, don't play with the prince. But then, I guess considering what my daughter said about your toady, that's a way too late warning, isn't it, Minster?" With that, Lovegood stood up. "The Potter proxy votes for the banning of Albus Dumbledore from Hogwarts," he declared, and then walked away, with a last mumbled, Not that it matters what it's decided here, considering that the Wizengamot doesn't have any say in Hogwarts at all. With that he left. Fudge stared after the man for a second or two before finally returning to his speech in the following vote on the Wizengamot, a vote that, thanks to Lovegood, ended one more in favour for Dumbledore's removal from Hogwarts, as Fudge had ever thought to dream of. Amelia Bones watched the man who was the Potter proxy, leaving the Wizengamot with shaded eyes. Potter? Somehow it always came back to the Potter family. She looked at the rest of the Wizengamot, her eyes tracking the different members. There in the corner was Moody, the ex-Auroran, one of the toughest men that she knew. A few rows in front of Amelia sat Augusta Longbottom, her back stiff, and she was clearly quite unimpressed by Fudge, even if she voted for Dumbledore's release from Hogwarts in the end. And next to Amelia? Next to her sat a man who had never been in his seat at the Wizengamot ever before. Said man leaned back in his chair and looked at the procedure with hooded eyes. "So," he mumbled to himself while looking at Fudge, "this is the venerable minister." Then he scoffed. "That man has no idea what it means to fight. This man has never seen what it means to stand next to a legend, next to someone so unbelievable that you just have to believe in him and follow him." He shook his head. "No, Fudge is a blind idiot. He won't outlast the day our alliance will form." Amelia looked at her neighbour in amusement. "You sound so sure about the return of Sal's Sanctuary," she whispered while leaning back in her seat as well and turning out Fudge's speech. The man next to her chuckled. "Of course I am," he replied. "I met him at Diagon Alley nearly half a year ago, and I know that he will want revenge on Dumbledore for Grindelwald, and maybe for Voldemort as well. It's not because Dumbledore slighted him, no, it's because of them." With that he nodded towards Moody and then towards Augusta. "Others suffered, and he won't stop until their suffering has been atoned for." And Amelia couldn't object to that thought process, considering that she held a grudge for the death of her brother and sister-in-law as well. 2 deaths Dumbledore had been involved in, even indirectly. No, Amelia understood grudges, and she couldn't blame Augusta or others for not being able to let go, but then she wasn't enough of a hypocrite to lie to herself about her own grudge for the death of her family and her inability to let it go. "So we're about to change our world, huh?" she asked, slightly amused. The answer was an amused smile from the man to her right. "We are," he agreed. "And here in this room are our allies." He nodded towards Augusta. "And our enemies," his hand gestured towards the still-speaking Fudge. "And maybe, just maybe, we will come out to a new world in the end." And Amelia, who had seen the memories of the man who had seen the last war and had seen the corruption of the government and the laid-back attitude Dumbledore showed, agreed without hesitation. It was time for a new world. It was time for a change. And Amelia would be a part of it, but not alone, never alone. Instead, she had allied herself with a person nobody had ever thought to see in the Wizengamot at all, Garrick Ollivander. And the man next to her smiled. Harry Potter was currently sitting in a quiet corner of the common room, working on the wards of the castle. He was done with the wards that would find him the Horcrux, but he was still working on the true wards of the castle, those that the wards the current headmaster had added suppressed. Harry knew that to activate the old wards, he would have to destroy the unprofessionally woven wards the old man had implemented on top of the original wards of Hogwarts. "What a mess," Harry mumbled while working through the ward schemes with a frown on his face. "What an absolute mess." Sadly, Dumbledore wouldn't be the one to fix it. Instead, this would be Harry's task. Such an absolutely horrible mess. Maybe Harry would have been once lenient when it came to one Albus Dumbledore. After all, he knew from experience, not everybody was born to be active against a Dark Lord. Not everybody was born to be a protector, fighter, and healer. Albus Dumbledore, Harry had figured a long time ago, was one of those people who weren't. And maybe Harry would have been able to forgive him. Maybe Harry would have been able to accept what the man had done, what the man hadn't done, and what mistakes he had made. Maybe, yet, it shouldn't be. Harry could have forgiven his childhood. Harry could have forgiven his years at Hogwarts and the neglect he faced. It had been thousands of years, after all, since it all happened, and Harry had long since then learned how to forgive, how to live, and how to accept the past. He had also long since learned that mistakes were part of being human, and not everybody was born to see more than their own world view. And yet, maybe, Harry thought while plotting out the setting of the wards, he planned to add to Hogwarts within the next few days. It was just a few days before Christmas, and soon, the most of the children would have left Hogwarts to return to their families. Maybe forgiving him was never the path I could have taken. Not after Grindelwald. Not after Voldemort. And especially not after his neglect of Hogwarts. The most damning thing against Dumbledore, a list of 72 names, the most of them known to the headmaster, that was hidden away in Harry's trunk. 72 names, 106 detentions Harry's spell had recorded since he had spoken the spell on Umbridge torture device. Every child had been approached by Harry. Every child had been advised by him to report the professor by their heads of house or the headmaster himself. Not all of them had listened, but enough had done what he had asked of them and either went to their heads or to the headmaster himself. And yet, nothing had happened. "We can't do anything," Albus Dumbledore had dismissed those reports. "I don't have the power to stop her. We just have to tell the children that they will have to keep their head down this year," he told the other teachers, and they listened, like always. Those teachers who had been approached listened until the children gave up reporting. Harry closed his eyes in disgust, returning his attention to his wards instead of the list in his trunk. Harry looked up to see Ron standing in front of him, hesitatingly looking down upon him. "What are you doing?" With a silent switching spell, Harry exchanged his ward scheme with his charm's homework. "Working on my homework," he said slowly, lying through his teeth while at the same time not lying at all. The ward scheme was something akin to homework for him after all. Ron frowned. It was clear that he wasn't sure if he could believe him or not. Ron had stopped to be so suspicious of Harry some time ago. The other boy was more of a live and let live person, after all, but that didn't mean that he couldn't read between the lines, especially with a boy he had known for the last 4 years. Even with all the experience added to Harry, there were still some telltale signs that someone who knew him could read and interpret. After all, as odd as it sounded, while a lot of things had changed about Harry, some things were still the same, or after all this time the same again. Who knew? Harry ignored Ron's slight suspicion, and maybe would have ignored the other boy fully if said boy hadn't found his courage and spoken up a second time. "May I join you?" he finally asked hesitatingly, and while Harry still wasn't too happy with him for his spying on him and the fact that Ron still listened to Hermione somewhat even now, he also knew that the other boy was still a child, and once had been Harry Potter's best friend. "Of course," he said, and when the other boy smiled, he made some place on his table so that Ron could sit down and pull out his homework as well. It wasn't something Ron would usually do, but obviously the other boy knew that stopping Harry from working wouldn't get over well right now and therefore decided to follow Harry's example instead of trying to stop him. It didn't take long for Hermione to notice them and her coming up to them and sitting down next to Ron to do her homework as well. Harry was slightly more annoyed by her intrusion, considering that Ron had stopped bothering him while Hermione seemed to find something new to complain about every time they did something together, but Harry refrained from saying anything. Like Ron, Hermione was a child, and once his best friend, and even if nobody else would have gotten another chance in Harry's books, he would at least tolerate her as long as she didn't budge into his business ever again. Considering that she didn't talk and didn't take a second look at Harry's homework or his ward scheme, now glamoured to look like his potions essay, Harry guessed that she could stay at their table for now. They worked in silence for a while, at least until suddenly, Hogwarts did something it hadn't done since Harry had arrived there in the current time. It reached out to him. He saw a flash of a detention of Umbridge, with a little second-year Hufflepuff cutting open her head thanks to that evil quill. Then there was another flash of the girl leaving, swaying on her feet, and a flash of Hogwarts trying to reach out to the headmaster, the deputy currently not in Hogwarts, just to be rejected by the busy mind of the headmaster. "Umbridge," Harry snarled mentally, but the next flash distracted him from his ire. This flash wasn't like the ones before. It was more like a calling from a long-missed precious person, urging, begging, and pleading for him to hurry. It was his utter calling him. It was the dormant wards begging him. It was his oaths 3 times pledged to protect the castle and its inhabitants, that called him out, and Harry was far too connected to his magic to dismiss their urging. By the gods, Harry swore, jumping up and toppling over the stair he had been sitting on. Harry? Hermione looked up from her homework, startled. What's going on? I have to go, Harry answered, not bothering to elaborate. Then he turned around and vanished through the ported hole. As soon as he was around the next corner, he started running. He ran down the hall, hissed at one of the tiny snakes in a corner, and vanished in the secret passages of the school. He had to hurry. Whatever had happened, it was grave. He could feel it in the urge that was pushing him. He could feel it in the air around him, pleading to him to hurry up. He speeded up. His breath was shallow, his lungs burning. But he had no time. No time. He reached the corridor to the hospital wing. With another hiss, he tumbled out of the wall, back into the known corridors of the school. He was dusty, and dirt was sticking to his robes. The secret passages he had used hadn't been the cleanest ones, not that he cared, not that it stopped him. His feet were carrying him down the corridor to his destination as fast as he could. Potter, a man's voice barked. Snape, but Harry had no time to stop. He ignored it, his blood humming, summoning him with all its power to aid. Potter! No running in the corridors. 20 points from Gryffindor. The professor might have changed, but he hadn't changed enough to not try to punish Harry for something Harry actually did do. And maybe if it had been any other time, Harry would have minded the harsh and cold tone of voice of the professor, but not now, not with his Atra's voice in his mind calling and begging him. Hurry up! His father's voice urged him without a sound. Hurry up, my child. He speeded up even more. Then he reached the last corner. A hand was reaching for him, but he dodged and flew around the corner. There it was, 5 steps from him. 4, 2. He grasped the doorframe and pulled himself in the room behind it. There, in the corner of the room, in the white sheets of a bed, a still form was lying. The meaty witch was standing next to it, uttering spells as fast as she could. She was sweating, trembling, and nearly exhausted. Umbridge, Harry mentally cursed. The child in the bed was unmoving, pale and painted with crimson. And all of that was Umbridge's fault. Umbridge and her damn quill. Even with the spell Harry had put on it, it didn't change the fact that by overuse of the quill, the child would suffer anyway, exactly like the girl in the bed in front of him. Umbridge was dead, especially since the blood loss had led to the girl's fall down the stairs. A fall that might end up deadly because no matter how good Madame Pomfrey was, she was still just a meaty witch and not a healer. Harry took the last steps to the bed in one stride and reached out for the meaty witch, fighting for the girl's life. Stop, he said softly, while at the same time he took out his staff and started to draw runes on the floor. You're not able to heal the child in your condition. Harry knew that he shouldn't be able to do so as well, but he also knew that calling St. Mungo's wouldn't help. The girl wouldn't survive the wait for a healer from the hospital. There was just one choice. Even if that choice would expose that he wasn't the same Harry Potter who had gone to school here just a few months ago. Harry's fingers closed over the meaty witch's hands, stopping her wand from moving. The meaty witch's hands trembled beneath his fingers. But the moment she felt his touch, she snapped out of her feverish spellcasting. Mr. Potter, she said, but he just shook his head and pushed gently her aside. You're not able to help the child? He repeated sternly. You're a meaty witch, not a healer. For a second, Madame Pomfrey looked blankly at him. Then she blinked, returning to the present. I have to St. Mungo's, she mumbled and wanted to turn around to reach the fireplace in her office. In that moment, Harry ended the rune chain he had been drawing and activated it. A soft, glowing shield surrounded him, and the meaty witch, stopping her from reaching the office and the fireplace within it. Then the doors of the hospital wing banged open again and Snape stormed in, looking like a fury. Mr. Potter, he boomed, and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the shining shield that surrounded Harry, Madame Pomfrey, and the tiny second-year Hufflepuff girl in the bed. Don't come any closer, Harry said coolly to his professor while he slipped out of his robes and put them down on the bed next to him. I don't have time to battle against a vengeance-searching teacher at the moment. And with that he turned around to the Hufflepuff girl and ripped open her clothing. Mr. Potter, Madame Pomfrey cried and tried to stop him. I need to see what I am doing, Harry snapped, stopping her. When you hinder me, I will banish you from my healing circle. I have enough to do without you interrupting me. The meaty witch stopped and stared at him. You're a student, Mr. Potter. You have no experience in... Harry turned her out. Instead, he took out one of his normally hidden knives and used it to fully open the clothing of the girl. Again, he drew some runes on the floor and activated them. A dome of different colored magic surrounded him, and the girl, shutting out and stopping the meaty witch, who had desperately tried to stop Harry from removing the girl's clothing. The moment he had ensured that she couldn't hinder him anymore thanks to the second dome of magic he had created, Harry actively studied the dome and the runes and hieroglyphs that were floating between the colors. This method of diagnosing might have been in Harry's repertoire for longer than he was inclined to think back, but it was still the most effective, especially because Harry was able to diagnose it within seconds, thanks to familiarity. Crushed ribcage. One rib was puncturing the lung. Her liver and one of her kidneys were bleeding. Her heart was fluttering, nearly losing the fight against the injuries. Her brain was swelling and her spine broken. Considering that she had fallen down nearly 3 floors before she had been caught by one of the moving stairs, Harry guessed that her injuries were expected. Not that those were all injuries she had. One of her hands was also smashed, one of her legs broken, and she had several bruises and cuts. But those were things a meaty witch could treat, so Harry turned them out. Instead, he drew several new runes on the floor to disinfect everything in their range. The runes also were shutting the door to stop anyone from entering and contaminating the hospital wing, and then took out his knife again. Mr. Potter, the meaty witch cried, but a simple rune from the dorms surrounding him stopped her from touching him. Harry ignored her horrified gasp and the shouting of his professor while he disinfected the knife in his hands. For a second he looked at the body of the girl. Then he closed his eyes for a second, censoring his breath while preparing himself for the operation he had to conduct mentally. Another second later he placed the knife and started to cut open the skin of the girl. He stopped after a few inches and used the blood that was turning her chest even more crimson than the already drying blood of her cuts to apply runes to her forehead, her wrists and her ankles. Then he applied some runes in her blood to his own forehead and forearms before cutting open his own wrist and applying some runes in his blood on her body. Mr. Potter? There was horror in Madame Pomfrey's and something cutting in Snape's voice. Harry ignored both, even when the meaty witch tried to reach out to him again just to be stopped by his wards like the first time. Harry didn't even bother to react to her try. Instead, he closed his cut and continued with a gentle bone breaker spell to the girl's head. This wasn't something someone untrained or an inexperienced healer could do. Gentling spells was nothing a person could learn overnight. It was part of a control of one's magic that took years if not decades to learn. But Harry had used spells in this version for longer than that. He also knew he had no time to tread the brain now because she was losing her life through the other injuries, so he had to give her brain some space until he could treat it. Nevertheless, his spell, spoken for better control, scared both of the adults in the room witless. The meaty witch and professor immediately tried to penetrate his shields with magic, both of them shouting and pale as a ghost. "Stop it, Mr. Potter. You will kill her." The potion professor even tried to turn around and leave the hospital wing to get the headmaster, but all their attempts were fruitless. The doors of the hospital wing had shut down when Harry activated the disinfection circle and did not yield even to magic. And Harry? He wasn't deterred from his path as all far too used to people trying to stop or interrupted him over the centuries. He had been a healer in the past. So instead of startling or worrying, he simply opened the chest of the little girl to reach the young girl's ribs. The first thing he did was to vanish the rib that was puncturing her lung. The lung was bloody and her heart fluttered even more. Harry had her in stasis so that she didn't lose any more blood, but he knew that even stasis did not stop her dying fully. Because of that, he had to heal her life-threatening injuries first. He didn't hesitate when he used his bare by magic sterilized hands to reach in her body. With a flick of his fingers, the blood on the lungs was removed and held at bay. Then he started to draw blue glowing magical runes on her lungs. When the rune circle was finished, he activated it and the lungs started slowly to heal. He checked the healing process for a moment, then he continued with the other organs. It was in the process of drawing the runes on her kidney when the colors of the net around him changed. The girl's heart gave in and stopped. Harry reacted instantly. He destroyed his started rune chain and turned to the heart. He needed the heart to aid him with his healing. A rune chain that healed a body was depending on the blood flow. A stopped heart would destroy all the work he had done if he did not treat it instantly. The curse, he whispered, was a dark one, not an unforgivable but definitely banned by the ministry. He didn't care. The spell he used worked like the electricity the Muggles used, and that was enough for him to know. "Mr. Potter," Snape snarled in the back of Harry, "stop it this instant, torturing a little girl in that condition." Harry turned him out, concentrating on the girl's heart instead. Nothing. No reaction. He used the spell a second time. A moment of silence just broken by the horrified cries of the nurse and the growls of the potion professor, and then the heart suddenly started to beat again. Stunned silence in his back from both potions master and meaty witch. Harry looked at the beating heart for a moment, then he sighed and checked his rune chains on the other organs. None of them had been broken. Good. He turned to the kidney again. 3 minutes later, another working rune chain was starting to fix this injury. Now her head finally. He ignored her open chest and turned to her swollen brain and the broken skull. The broken skull was his fault, but it had been the best thing to do, and it was easily fixed later. He ignored the broken pieces of her skull, none of them hurting the brain or anything else important in any way or form, and instead started to draw runes in the air above her. Then his bloody fingers touched her temples, and the runes activated. He could feel the runes sinking in her head. They touched the brain, and the swelling slowly reduced. Harry sighed in love and added a rune to stabilize her skull until he had time to heal it. A broken skull was easier to mend than a spine, so the spine came first. Now the spine. He looked up at the net of the dome. The dome, with its different colors and symbols, not only told him the injuries, but also if and how he could move the body without damaging it further. It was that feature that helped him most with the spine, and while a broken spine would have ended by a non-magical in a wheelchair, a skilled healer could heal nerves as long as the injury was fresh. So Harry used his diagnostic dome to righten the girl until her spine was straight again. Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and touched her shoulders with his hands. With trembling fingers he followed her body line while rightening the nerves and bones with magic, mentally using his own spine as a reverence. The spine was still broken, but it was sitting right again, and the nerves were like they should be. After the spine and the nerves were in the right position again, he froze it like it was now with magic and turned to the rib cage. The most of it he also just froze with magic in the place it belonged. He was exhausted, his own unhealthy body acting up, still not well after all this time. Halloween's ritual still robbing him of the strength he normally had, and saw no meaning in fixing the bones fully when there were potions and spells that could do it after he banished the stasis runes. So he simply turned to the chest of the girl again, looked over the now mended organs, and started to close the cut he had made until it simply was a flesh wound. Then he stopped. There was nothing that a meaty witch could not do by herself now. He coughed and then simply destroyed the rune circles around the bed. Then he stumbled to the bed next to the child's and sat down. "Mr. Potter," the potion master barked and turned to him, storming to his side. "What did you do?" At the same time, the meaty witch hurried to the child's side and started to cast spells on her, checking the girl's health frantically and clearly afraid of what she would find. Harry's eyes nearly dropped from exhaustion while he curled up when he coughed again quite strongly. For a second he was fighting for his next breath, then his eyes closed and he gulped in air. His hands started shaking. Damn Halloween ritual and its consequences. "Mr. Potter," the potion master barked again. Not that Harry could actively focus on him in that moment. "What did you think you were doing, you imbecile? If the girl dies because of you, I will personally bring you to Azkaban." "How could—" Severus? Madame Pomfrey interrupted him in that moment. Stop! Poppy, this imbecile saved this child's life. Madame Pomfrey finished the potion professor's sentence softly before she turned to Harry, who was still taking slow and deliberate breaths. She frowned at that, but obviously decided that fighting with him over his own well-being could wait for a moment and other things were more important to know. How, Mr. Potter? She asked him, ignoring his heavy breaths for now. You're a student. You shouldn't be able to rescue her. I couldn't, and I'm a trained meaty witch. Harry sighed. He knew he shouldn't tell her, but he also knew that Dumbledore would find out if he didn't tell her something she could accept. A meaty witch isn't trained for something like that. Even St. Mungo's would have had trouble to save her life, he finally said. Then why did you even attempt to heal her? Snape sneered, clearly intent to insult Harry again. Sadly for him, Harry currently hadn't the patience to deal with one of Snape's rants and therefore interrupted him before the potion's master could get any further. Because I am not a meaty wizard but a healer, Harry answered coolly. Hogwarts knew Madame Pomfrey would be unable to aid the child, so it called me here. What are you talking about, Potter? Snape snapped. Why should the school... Why do you think I was running through the corridors like Riddle and Grindelwald together were hot on my heels, Professor? Harry asked, irritated. I ran here and started healing as soon as I reached the child. Do you really think I would have done something like that without knowing that something had happened that needed my aid? I was in Gryffindor Tower just a few minutes before I got here. Snape snorted. So you tell me that Hogwarts is communicating with you, Potter? Snape sneered. Harry sighed again. He wished he could sleep, far too exhausted for such a simple, for his experience at least, healing ritual, but he knew that the meaty witch and the potion professor wouldn't let him be right now. At least not without getting all the answers they were after, first. Oh well, it wasn't as if Harry would be able to not be found out for forever. Also, his plan was well on its way. Even if he was found out now, there would be no stopping it anymore in time. Etchet, show the professor, please, he finally said softly. Snape started to sneer again, clearly about to comment about Harry's sanity or lack thereof. Considering that Harry was speaking to the empty air, when he suddenly flinched, his eyes widened and he stared at Harry. Clearly the wards had given him the same urging feeling Harry had felt all his way from Gryffindor Tower to the hospital wing. Believe me now, Professor? Harry asked softly. Snape just stared at him, and suddenly Harry could feel a mind trying to enter his own. He sneered at Snape, and this time brought down his occlumency barrier, with so much force that the professor could feel it. Snape flinched again and withdrew hastily. How? You are rubbish at occlumency, Potter, he snarled. Harry just snorted. Normally, I hide my shields, Professor, he corrected, and then turned to the meaty witch, who was silently healing the rest of the girl's wounds. You need to fix her bones with potions, but wait some hours before you do so. The magic I used to heal her internal injuries needs time to settle, he told her, deciding to ignore Snape in favor to explaining the upcoming treatment of the girl's injuries. For a moment, the meaty witch sent him an indefinable look, but then she nodded slowly as if accepting a silent conclusion she had come to while reassessing the girl after his treatment of her. Obviously her conclusion had been a good one, because at the end of his instructions, she didn't tell him that he couldn't order her round. Instead, she treated him like a colleague. Something else I should know, Mr. Potter? The meaty witch asked him professionally. Harry nodded slightly at her, not only an answer to her question, but also a gesture to show he understood and agreed to her treatment of him. Don't move her and stop her from moving for the next day. After that she's allowed to move in bed but should not get up for the rest of the week, Harry answered her tiredly while trying to dismiss the odd feeling of instructing a woman he knew for a fact had monitored his mother while she had been pregnant with him. For a moment Madame Pomfrey looked at him thoughtfully after hearing those words. Then her gaze sharpened and she narrowed her eyes at him. Harry mentally groaned. Obviously his short break from the Inquisition was up. Time to bring out the big guns. But first it was time for the meaty witch or the potions professor to make their move. In the end it was the meaty witch that started it. Would you mind telling us how you were able to heal her when I couldn't? She asked. I am a healer, Harry repeated, and when the potion master and the meaty witch just stared at him coolly, he sighed again and tipped his chest to activate a visible form of his healer's oath on it. The light of the runic circle shone bright even in the brightly lit hospital wing. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was as damning and as liberating as showing this oath. There was no way faking a healer's oath. There was no way at gaining it in any other way but through hard work and knowledge. In was unquestionable, undisputable, and at the same time for Harry undeniable. He couldn't run from it. He couldn't ignore it. This oath, as different as it was to the normal healer's oath, considering that he was a guardian healer, was and would be forever part of him, bound to him like it was bound to every other healer on the planet. For a moment, Snape and the Mediwitch just stared at his chest. Then the potions master reached out and touched the glowing circle. The circle flashed, proving itself true and powerful to the searching magic of a sworn potions master, and Snape withdrew his hands. His black eyes looked up from Harry's chest into Harry's eyes. "You are not Potter," he stated. Harry knew why the potions master said that. As a potions master, Snape was sworn to aid healers in their quest, but at the same time his own oath would react to a healer's oath and tell him exactly how important it was to aid this particular healer. The more experience, the more important a healer was, because with more experience he would be commanding more healers in a grave situation, and at the same time he would be given more complicated cases to treat. Harry was quite sure that his oath was telling the potions master to obey without asking if the need arose, exactly like it had done for millennia now. "You are not quite wrong, and at the same time not quite right with your statement," Harry corrected his potions professor, shrugging. Snape sneered, clearly not believing Harry at all. "Potter's no healer, and especially not one as experienced as you," he disputed Harry's correction acily. Harry just smiled. "You might have been right if you were talking about the Potter child you taught for the last 4 years, he agreed. "But then, I am said Potter child, and I am a healer." Snape's sneer deepened. "You are babbling, Potter," he told his student, disgusted. Harry just sighed. He knew that if he wanted to, he would be able to find a solution to Snape's accusations, especially considering that Snape had already met his head of house and had agreed to follow him. But Harry didn't want to. No, lying to the other man right now would just shatter the fragile trust Snape had placed in his new head of house the moment the Potter family would return to the Wizengamot, and Harry wasn't willing to be seen as the same unreliable creature as Dumbledore and Riddle were. So he did the only thing he could. He settled on the truth. Damn the consequences. "I'm telling you the truth," he replied calmly to Snape's accusation. "I meant what I said. I am the Potter child you have been referring to, but at the same time, I'm not him as well." "That doesn't make sense, Mr. Potter," the nurse pointed out, and Harry rubbed his nose. "Let's just say that the incident with the Dementors in summer had a little bit more consequences than the public knows. There wouldn't be many people Harry would ever tell the truth, but in this instant it was the best thing he could do, while hoping that neither Snape nor Madame Pomfrey would run to Dumbledore with said truth. Harry trusted Snape to keep silent, and Harry guessed that he trusted Pomfrey as well, especially because both of them could be easily bound by their oaths, and the fact that Harry was their superior and the knowledge they would gain from him had some medical consequences. His trip through time wasn't just a personal matter, but also a public one, and one that ended with him in a dire medical condition. Of course, like every oath in the medical part of the wizarding world, the hows and whys someone had ended up in a condition were protected by it if the person in question didn't allow the circumstances to be known. Getting Snape and Pomfrey to treat him was even easier, especially because he was still forcefully regulating his breathing if he wasn't about to cough up a lung or two. "A little more consequences?" Pomfrey asked, sounding disturbed, while Snape raised a disbelieving eyebrow. "Consequences that made you an expert potions master and healer, Potter?" he asked snidely, just seconds after the meaty witch. Harry inclined his head. "Exactly, Professor," he replied, not bothering to elaborate as long as neither Pomfrey nor Snape asked the right questions. Snape just sneered again. I can't think of any consequences that would make someone inept like you into a potions master and a healer overnight, he replied icily. Maybe you want to tell me that Merlin himself visited you at night and taught you all he knew. Maybe you want to tell me that you're super smart and just hid your IQ until now. Or maybe you hid yourself away in Hogwarts library and learned all day and night. Harry laughed. No, Professor, he said. Knowledge is all fine and well, but you need experience to actually be able to do those things I just did. It's experience that forms the character and truly leads to knowledge. Book learning is good and fine, but it's not enough. You can't just learn from books hidden away in a dark and dinky room with nothing but the spiders to keep you company. Theoretical knowledge will never lead to you knowing exactly what to do in a real-life experience. Then how did you learn, Potter? Snape asked as snidely as before. As far as I know, you never left your aunt's at the summer. Harry looked at the potions master in amusement. I left her home, he said. I didn't return to her home for quite some years. It's just that the way I left means that everyone else didn't notice, since in the end I was never not there. Snape's eyes narrowed, but the nurse's widened. Obviously her brain had been faster than Snape's in connecting the dots and seeing the whole picture Harry was painting for them. You time-traveled, she said, paling. Do you know how dangerous this could have been? Have you ever thought about the consequences of such actions? The Ministry banned time travel for a reason, Mr. Potter. Harry inclined his head. I am quite aware what happened to Donzelle Louise, he replied. But unlike her, I was aware of the laws of time. Donzelle Louise? Both. Snape and the Mediwitch asked sharply. Harry frowned thoughtfully at the ceiling. Eloise Mintumble, he finally declared. She was an unspeakable and the best friend of my grandfather Fleamont Charles Potter. She jumped back to the 1400s. And unlike me, she didn't even try to understand how time travel works. When Madame Pomfrey looked at him skeptically, he just sighed. I know my arithmancy, madam, he said. I did the calculations, and I never played with the fire. I was fine, madam. Still, Mr. Potter, she said, this has to be reported. You will get in serious trouble for... Well, if she wanted to play it like that, Harry would play it like that. And if there were some things that would stay omitted and therefore could be considered a half-truth, well, Harry wasn't the Slytherin for nothing. It's reported, he said, amused, not elaborating that the report had been made millennia later than it should have been made. But then, on the other hand, Harry had told his father the moment he met him and the moment they found out. So you could see it as reported from the start as well. And I didn't get in any trouble. Accidental magic isn't punishable by the law. Snape stared at him at that penetratingly. So you want to make us believe that you didn't play with magic you shouldn't have touched, Potter? He said disbelievingly. Harry just raised an eyebrow. Do you want to accuse me of playing with magic while I was fighting for my life? He countered. I was a mere boy of 15. Tell me, Professor, do you really think that I had the knowledge to do something as powerful and complicated as time travel on the spur of a moment while at the same time fighting of Dementors? The potions, Professor pressed his thin lips together. I do not, he finally relented under Harry's stare. So I guess that we can agree that the whole thing had to be accidental, don't we? Harry replied coolly. For a moment, the Mediwitch as well as the potions master were silent. Then Snape growled. I guess so, Potter. He gave in, his voice very icy and clearly unhappy that he had to admit that Harry might have a good argument at hand. Harry snorted, amused with the professor before leaning forward, while taking a deep, forcibly calm breath. There is no guessing it, Professor, he told the disagreeable man calmly. Back then, I was an arrogant, idiotic child who knew nothing about the world. I was willfully blind to some things and too undereducated to see others. In other words, I was a child, a young and stupid little child. Then Harry's green eyes met the dark ones of the professor, holding his gaze and willing him to see what the man, even after the occlumency lesson they shared, was still too blind to see. Or maybe it wasn't just blindness. Maybe the professor was suffering from the same willfully blind behavior that Harry had been guilty of in the past. The professor's eyes narrowed at Harry. Then they suddenly widened. You're him, aren't you? he whispered in disbelief. "You're the one who's been calling you home, yes," Harry agreed. For a moment the silence between them spread, then Snape shook his head, for the first time forgetting his attitude in favor to his confusion. "But why?" he asked. "I'm still family," Harry interrupted him, "and like anybody else in that room back then, allowed to finally have what you've been craving for so long." Snape fell silent at that, something that Madame Pomfrey took as her cue to butt in. "What exactly is going on here?" she asked with narrowed eyes. "What have you two been talking about right now?" Harry turned to her and smiled innocently. "More than you need to know, madam," he replied, amused. "For now, I guess, it should be enough for you to know that I'm back in my right time, and that it's high end that I will follow my own path, and not the one drawn in the sand by the headmaster for me." Madame Pomfrey's eyes narrowed further. "What are you talking about, Potter?" she wanted to know icily. "Albus Dumbledore is a good man who has always had your best interest in heart." Harry just raised an eyebrow at that. "So you think ensuring that an 11-year-old goes after the Philosopher's Stone is having my best interest in heart?" he countered. The good Mediwitch's eyes nearly bugged out when hearing that. I'm quite sure he did everything to ensure that you would be kept away from such dangerous things," she finally exclaimed, horrified. Harry snorted. "The challenges to keep people away were a devil's snare, a giant chess set, flying keys, a troll, a logic puzzle, and a mirror, and from that, only the mirror was a true challenge, unless you actually didn't want to use the Philosopher's Stone. Because then it would be child's play." Madame Pomfrey stared at him, uncomprehendingly. You're joking, aren't you, Potter?" she asked and shivered. "The Devil's Snare is a first-year plant, and Potter already proved that he could take on a troll way before the challenges were even fully formed. He showed it on Halloween, for heaven's sake," Snape exclaimed, for the first time looking thoughtful. "Exactly," Harry agreed, coolly. "That doesn't prove anything, Mr. Potter." Madame Pomfrey objected. Harry shrugged. "Like Dumbledore being unable to find out that the monster in Slytherin's chamber is a basilisk, and the fact that the entrance is the death place of the one girl who died, thanks to the gaze of the basilisk. A girl who died while Albus Dumbledore was already teaching at Hogwarts, meaning that not knowing who she was is out of question for him," he countered icily. Madame Pomfrey paled, and even Snape looked as if he felt sick. "A basilisk!" the Mediwitch exclaimed, even more horrified. "That creature is one of the most dangerous creatures in the world. We would have evacuated the school if we had known." Harry just raised an eyebrow at the Mediwitch. "It is, and the teachers should have, considering that Albus Dumbledore should have known what kind of monster was sleeping in the bowls of the school." "How should he have known?" "The monster is, if you believe the legend, that is, Slytherin's monster." Slytherin. What was Slytherin most known for, except of being a dark wizard? It was Snape who answered that question. "He's a Parselmouth," he answered with a frown. "That's a well-known fact." "Exactly," Harry agreed coolly. "Slytherin was a Parselmouth, so what kind of creature could be his monster?" Snape closed his eyes. "A snake," he whispered, obviously thinking about the implications for the first time. "A basilisk. Because that's the most dangerous snake on Earth." Harry smiled grimly. 20 points to Slytherin for a conclusion within 2 minutes of something the current headmaster couldn't find out for 50 years, he said with a sigh. Madame Pomfrey pressed a hand to her mouth. "But he knew where the girl died. He knew what the monster was, and yet it was I who was forced to rescue the school," Harry commented. "The headmaster doesn't speak parcel tongue," Madame Pomfrey argued. "Yet he knew that there was a child in school who could, a child whom he could have asked for help after the first attack," Harry replied harshly, "or he could have found another Parselmouth within the last 50 years. After all, the Slytherin line isn't the only one who has Parselmouths in the family." At that, Madame Pomfrey looked a bit helplessly at Snape, who looked quite pale. "The headmaster wouldn't let the children suffer, not without having no other choice," she finally argued, "but it was half-heartedly." "Yet, there were Dementors at school in my 3rd year," Harry replied. "I'm quite sure a lot of children suffered that year." "This was the decision of the Ministry, Potter," Snape said, sounding a bit defeated himself. "They have the ultimate control when it comes to the school. Harry just raised an eyebrow at that. You mean to tell me they control something that exists longer than their institution, gods, longer than the Wizards' Council? How by the gods do you plan to explain to me how the Ministry could have control over an institution that neither the Wizards' Council nor the Gathering of the Lords controlled? Harry argued icily. There's also the fact that every damn headmaster on that wall behind Dumbledore's desk, who was headmaster before the Ministry was established, knows those facts. So even if Dumbledore wouldn't have known, moment Fudge would have tried to force him, those headmasters would have been obligated to tell him. Madame Pomfrey closed her eyes at that in dismay. That doesn't mean anything, Snape said harshly. This wouldn't be the first time the Ministry would claim something that wasn't theirs from the beginning. Harry smiled vengefully. And if they have, they will suffer the consequences. There are laws that ensure Hogwarts neutrality. Breaking them won't make Fudge happy. Harry replied, but then Dumbledore giving in will have consequences for him as well. Those last words seemed to connect the final pieces of the puzzle for Snape, because he paled even further. You plan vengeance, Snape whispered. You plan vengeance against the headmaster and who knows who else. Harry just raised an eyebrow at that, not answering. Snape stiffened. On me as well? He asked, for the first time not sounding too sure at all. Obviously the knowledge that Harry had travelled in time and was a sworn healer had made him cautious of Harry. Harry crooked his head. I already had some of my vengeance on you, he pointed out, and I might have hesitated to enact more, considering that you are a part of my house. But that doesn't mean that you won't suffer at the hands of my son instead. He is quite fond of making the younger members of our family suffer under his care. Snape frowned at that. Son? He repeated, but Harry waved it off. Not important right now, Harry replied. I won't say anything more about him right now. I think that having a son definitely is important, Mr. Potter. Madame Pomfrey objected. Harry looked at her bemused. Of course my son is important to me, he agreed amused. But his identity isn't of importance right now in this discussion. Neither Madame Pomfrey nor Severus Snape could object to that. Then Harry's gaze turned serious. On the other hand, your cooperation is important for this discussion, he told the two of them. Madame Pomfrey frowned at that, but to Harry's surprise, Snape inclined his head immediately. I won't say anything, the potions master agreed, ensuring that Madame Pomfrey looked at him in surprise as well. Snape's gaze turned penetratingly towards her. He's part of my family, Snape said, and I decided months ago that I would stand by family from now on. I won't change my decision after finding out that Potter's also a part of it. My head of house remained unsaid. Harry smiled a nearly hidden smile at that. Very well, he agreed, before turning to Madame Pomfrey. What do you say, madam? The meaty witch still frowned, now at both of them. In the end, her sharp gaze turned towards Harry. I treat you, and my oath will ensure that I'm quiet, she compromised sternly. Harry grimaced. This wasn't what he wanted. He knew that the moment she cast a diagnosis at him, there was no hiding of his dying body anymore, and a dying body it was. Even now, Harry was forcibly controlling his breathing to ensure that he wasn't coughing up a lung or two. But then, within the last months, his health had slowly degraded, and Harry knew that in the next months it would degrade even further. There was no changing his death anymore. He closed his eyes and sighed. All right, he finally said, with another sigh. Just don't go into shock, all right? Madame Pomfrey frowned at him. Go into shock? She asked, confused. I'm not that easy to shock. Harry snorted. Normally I would agree with you, but this time, just believe me that you won't like what you will find out, he told her tiredly. Snape frowned at that as well. Potter, he said slowly, are you keeping other secrets from us as well? Harry looked at him scathingly. I've time-traveled and lived in the past for years, he countered amused. Of course I've got a lot of secrets I haven't told you or anyone else. Nevertheless, Madame Pomfrey said, you will submit to my diagnostic spells right now. Harry just sighed again, but in the end inclined his head. As you wish, madam, he agreed. Madame Pomfrey's eyes narrowed at that. I guess you already know what I will find, she stated. Harry looked at her in bitter amusement. "I've known for months, madam," he agreed. "Now, if you will—" The spell Madame Pomfrey cast left her and Snape paling, while Harry just closed his eyes in silent acceptance. You're— Madame Pomfrey whispered, unable to end the sentence she was about to formulate. "Dying," Harry agreed. "I know, Potter." Oddly enough, Snape's voice sounded rough, and his dark eyes were piercing, as if he could change Harry's fate by just staring at him deliberately. "How can you simply accept—" "I've already lived my life," Harry answered, with a shrug. "I might officially be only 15 in this time, but that doesn't change the fact that I have already lived a full life in the past, with a job, with a wife and children. Dying is just the next step for that." For a moment Madame Pomfrey and Snape exchanged a surprised look, but in the end, neither said something at all to that. Instead, Madame Pomfrey decided to focus on his health. "This is all well and good, Mr. Potter," she said, "but I won't sit by and let you suffer if I can stop it. I might not be able to heal you, whatever you did. It's basically unstoppable while destroying your body and has been since it happened. But the least I can do is lessen your suffering by prescribing you some potions for your symptoms." Harry knew what she was talking about. The potions she meant were either already used by him or couldn't be used so long he planned on working the magic of the wards. Ritual magic like that could interact with taken potions negatively, after all, and Harry didn't plan to add even more to his suffering. "As you wish," he said in the end, not elaborating further. After all, even if she prescribed those potions to him, he wasn't forced to take them. "I will set up to brew them immediately," Snape said, his eyes narrowed. "And I want a written record of your scan, Poppy. Maybe I can find a cure for whatever Potter managed to do to himself this time around." Harry looked at the other man, amused. Of course, the other man didn't know that Harry had played with potions even longer than he had been a healer, but that also didn't mean that the other man wouldn't be able to find a solution. Harry hadn't. Harry might have the greater experience, but that didn't mean that he wasn't blind to some possibilities a new set of eyes might see. "Thank you, Severus," he said instead. For a moment Snape looked ready to take points from Harry for using his first name, but then the potions master snapped his mouth shut with a growl. "I guess you have every right to call me by my first name," he allowed Harry grudgingly. "I won't in class," Harry promised immediately, and the professor nodded stiffly. Pomfrey, on the other hand, sent a look to the unconscious child in the other bed before making up her mind. "And you may call me Poppy Potter," she said. "After all, we are colleagues." Harry smiled. "I am Salvazaha," he replied, "or Sal, considering that people have often trouble pronouncing my name." Of course, Harry could have used the same name as he had with Moody, or a different constellation of his names altogether, but he was used to be called Sal. And considering that he would return to that name very soon, he guessed that it didn't hurt to tell those two people who wouldn't be able to tell his secrets to anybody else, thanks to their oaths. "Sigh, but the meaty witch stuttered. "Salva Sa Serendu Harry James Potter," Harry elaborated with an eye roll. "My parents nicknamed me Harry, something that the headmaster and everybody else took as my true name when they died." The meaty witch blinked at that, still surprised, before she shook her head, something akin to understanding in her eyes. "One name from the mother, one from the father, and one from the godfather," she whispered. "And there I thought that Lily and James might have gone the less traditional way, naming you just Harry James." "That's what everybody else thought as well," Harry agreed. The meaty witch shook her head a second time, before sighing and turning to her cabinets. 10 minutes later, Harry was finally allowed to leave the hospital wing and return to Gryffindor Tower. The meaty witch had originally wanted him to stay, but Harry had told her plainly that there was nothing else she could do for him, and that he had things to do, so in the end, she had given in and sent him on his way. Of course, that also meant that he would have to come by before breakfast the next morning and every day after. That was the bargain they struck after a heated discussion of 2 against 1. 2 like Severus Snape and Poppy Pomfrey against Salvazaha Potter. But considering that Harry had to look after the girl he had treated, he would have come by regularly for the next week or so, anyway. Everything after, well, Harry was sure that he would be able to renegotiate the bargain at the end of those weeks. As for the meaty witch and Snape knowing part of the truth, well, Harry wasn't concerned about it, considering that the potions master had decided to brew the potions for Harry and the meaty witch was looking after him, considering that those actions made him their patient and his illness was caused, as far as they knew, thanks to his time traveling. They wouldn't be able to talk about anything he told them without violating their oaths, which ensured his safety quite well. Of course, Harry mumbled to himself while returning to Gryffindor Tower, this all will be a moot point in the near future. Dumbledore will soon be removed from any position of possible power over me, and the whole secrecy will be moot after the Wizengamot meeting in January anyway. With that thought, he opened the portrait and entered the common room to rejoin his once best friend working on his homework of ward construction. When Harry stormed out of the room, it was Hermione, who looked after him with a frown. "Ron," she said slowly, and the other boy looked up from his homework. "What is it, Hermione?" he asked her with narrowed eyes. Hermione knew that he wasn't too happy with her for always doubting Harry, but she couldn't help herself. There was something different, something she couldn't explain, and that made her feel uneasy about Harry. The boy had changed. He was wiser, he was colder and more distant. But that wasn't all of it. It were his eyes that had changed the most. Harry's eyes back last year had been like every other boy's eyes to Hermione, maybe a bit more tired, a bit more beaten down, but all in all still the eyes of a boy, even if it were the eyes of a boy who had seen too much. But now Harry's eyes weren't those of a boy anymore. She couldn't explain it. They were the same eyes, yet there was a knowledge and a darkness in there that made them older, so much older than a boy's eyes could ever be. No, not only a boy's eyes, those eyes were even older than a man's eyes should be. The eyes of Harry were the eyes who had seen it all, had lived through it all and prevailed. They were the eyes of a survivor, a killer, a healer. They were the eyes of a being far older and far more powerful than anybody could ever imagine. They were the eyes of death. And Hermione could only shiver and fight against her instincts to run every time she saw death looking out from the eyes that had once held her best friend. And she simply couldn't at all accept that Harry was gone, and death had taken his place. So she sat there, saw the differences, and doubted Harry because doubting him was the only thing she could do until she found out how she was able to get back the Harry she knew whose place had been taken by death himself. "Ron," she whispered, "don't you think that we should go and look for Harry?" Ron frowned at her. "No," he said. "No, Hermione, we should leave him be." "But look how he left." "I know," Ron nodded, his eyes narrowing at the portrait hole. "I know that there's something odd with Harry, but if we don't stop accusing him or following him now, he will give up on our friendship, and this isn't something I want. Do you, Hermione?" "No," Hermione shook her head, her face twisting in fear. "But there's something different with him, and we need to know. We need to help him." "We do," Ron agreed, then shook his head. "And we will, but not by praying into something he doesn't want to talk about. Merlin, Hermione, he could have a girlfriend from Slytherin for all we know. I know that if I was in love with a Slytherin or was going out with one, I wouldn't tell you guys immediately as well. Let him be. He will come around when he's ready." "But no," Ron shook his head, and then deliberately returned to writing his homework. "And even if I agreed to follow him, he's long gone now. There's no way to find out where he went without breaking into Harry's trunk and taking the map." Hermione had to concede that he was right about that. "Still," she said, "the next time he runs off without an explanation, we will follow him." "And ensure that he gets angry again?" Ron countered. "Have you forgotten the last time you reported him to Dumbledore?" Hermione shook her head. "We won't report him," she replied, her decision final. "We will take him to task after confronting him." For a moment Ron seemed to want to object to that as well, but in the end he nodded reluctantly. "All right," he agreed. "If that's what you wish to do."